Welcome to Chapter 3 of this course, JavaScript for Beginners, where we are going to now spend this chapter learning about functions in JavaScript. So a function is basically a piece of code that runs when a user does something on a page. So for example, I've gone to Spotify, the music streaming service. If someone was to click on login and they're already a user, by clicking on that, it's going to bring them to their login page. And there's various different choices. So for example, you can continue with Google, Facebook, Apple, or you can enter your username, email, password, and then click on login. Okay, so if hypothetically someone is signed up to Spotify already, so you already got to be thinking about that logic. You know, if someone is signed in and if they enter the correct password. So we've already seen decision making and control flow in the last chapter. But say they are signed up, they do have the correct password, and they press a button, log in, Spotify can run some code, i.e. a function, that logs the user in. Now, Spotify are not going to write a piece of code for me, Darren O'Neill, to log in, just me, and then a piece of code, for you to log in, just you. No, what they're going to do is they're going to write a piece of code that can be reused for every user. So if I forget my password, if I'm a user, or you forget your password, there's some sort of function that is called or runs when a user presses on a button. So there's obviously different types of functions that Spotify have written because, for example, there's this option here to sign up for Spotify. So maybe if a user presses that button, it runs a function to bring them up to a sign up page. There's probably another function here, well there is a function of course, for the login button, and another one for the forgot your password. Okay, so we're going to be learning about functions in JavaScript in this course. If I click on sign up for Spotify, there's obviously some sort of function that's after running that has now brought me to this new page. It's saying, looks like you're in Canada, you need to sign up to that one. I actually am in Canada, I'm traveling right now. Okay, great. So guys, that is a function in JavaScript. Basically what a function is it is a reusable piece of code. If a user does something, i.e. presses on a button, you can run a function. So in the next tutorial, we'll start talking about the syntax of a function, how you can create a function name, the keyword function in JavaScript, the structure, so parentheses, and the code block and all of that. So I'll see you in the next tutorial where we will start now actually writing some code, learning about basic functions. We're going to have to cover all the basics. Obviously, we have to walk before we run. So we're not going to straight away be writing very complicated functions that signs up a user, gets their details and sends it off to a database. We'd have to learn about asynchronous code or asynchronous JavaScript and talking to APIs, which we will be discussing later on in this course. But for now, we're going to focus on the very basics, the building blocks of functions, and we'll build our knowledge from there. So I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay, I hope you're excited for this tutorial, because in this tutorial, we're actually going to write out our first function together. So in the last tutorial, I explained what a function was. Essentially, a function is a piece of code that is waiting to be called to fulfill its purpose. So there's different types of functions. You could create a very basic function that just adds two numbers together, and when a user presses a button, it calls the function and adds two numbers together. A more advanced function would be a user maybe on a streaming service, maybe like YouTube, pressing a button and it does a search for videos, whatever the user was looking for. Maybe the user types in, weather in Paris, and then there's all these videos about the current weather in Paris, okay? So functions are basically code that is, it's code that's waiting there to be called or run by a user. So that is what a function is. It's hard to, I suppose, describe without actually writing one. So we're going to write one in a moment. And then the next thing is why are functions useful? It's because we are able to embrace this concept called dry, which basically means do not repeat yourself, or don't repeat yourself. It's this idea that if you keep writing out the same piece of code over and over, maybe you actually need to put it inside of a function, so that way you can just call or invoke the function every time you want to run that piece of code. Okay. So what I'm going to do in this tutorial is we're going to write out our first function together. So there are many different ways to write a function in terms of the syntax, but we're just going to start at the most basic level. So what you do is to create a function, let me just do a comment here. create a function or write a function. It's more like write, or technically the more accurate word is you're defining a function. We'll just say write a function for now, but really we're defining a function. So how you create, write, or define a function, whatever terminology you want to use, is you actually write out the keyword. We're about to learn another keyword now in JavaScript, and that is function. So you write out the keyword function, and then what you need to do is you need to give this function a name. So how you can do that is just type it out. We'll use camel case. So our first function, when we call it, is just going to log out hello you to the console. So I'm going to call our function say hello, and what you need to do is you need to put parentheses after this. Okay, so we have our parentheses that indicates that is a function, and then we have our curly braces. We have our opening and closing curly brace. The next thing we do is we then write out whatever code it is we want to do inside of the function. So I'm just going to write out console.log, and then we're just going to have hello you, okay? And then semicolon to end the statement there. I'm not going to put a semicolon after the function, okay? So basically what we've done is we've used the keyword function, a keyword in JavaScript. Then we have our name. I've called the function say hello. Note the use of camel case. The H is an uppercase. Then we have our parentheses. Then we have our opening curly brace and our closing curly brace. And in between the curly braces is all the code that's going to run when we call or invoke the function, in this case, hello you. So if I save and refresh, and if I come up to the browser and refresh, nothing is happening, okay? We don't see hello you logged out to the console. And that is because what we've done is we've defined the function, okay? We've defined our function, but we haven't actually called or invoked the function, okay? So basically, this function has been defined. It's waiting to be called before it logs out hello you to the console. So how you call or invoke a function, in this case, all you need to do is just write out the function name, say hello, and then parentheses. And you can do a semicolon to end the statement. So up here, we are defining our function, but it hasn't ran yet. It hasn't done anything because we haven't actually called it. Where down here, we call or invoke the function say hello. So what's going to happen now is this piece of code here, JavaScript is going to say, okay, I need to call the function say hello. It looks up and says, there's the function. What do? We execute the code in between the curly braces. So we simply log out hello you to the console. If I now come back to Google Chrome, save and refresh, we get hello you. So another way of thinking of this is, imagine you're in trouble and you need to get help from Superman, okay? You'll have to call Superman to get help. You'll say, hey, Superman, I'm in trouble, help, or whatever the case may be. I mean, technically, he actually has superpowers, so he could probably hear you're in trouble from a mile away, or maybe even more. But the key point here is that while Superman has the powers to come and save you if you are in trouble, you first of all have to call out for help. So it's the same idea with a function. You create or invoke the function, and then you can call the function here. And by the way, you can call or invoke a function many times. So if I just paste out say hello many times, save and refresh, each time JavaScript gets to any of these lines of code, it's going to say, okay, I need to call or invoke the say hello function. So what we've done is we've created a function once, but we've actually called upon it multiple times. So congratulations, you've just written your first function with me in this course. I'll see you in the next tutorial where we will continue to build on the basic building blocks of functions. So I'll see you in the next tutorial. Hey friends, welcome back and thank you for coming back. Okay, in the last tutorial we saw our very first function in JavaScript. And in the next tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a more useful function where we're going to create a function that basically rolls a dice, so gets us a number between 1 and 6. So we can call it like roll dice, and then when we call or invoke the function, we get a number between 1 and 6. Before we do that, however, we really make our first actually useful function. I just want us to create 2 more functions here just so you get a bit more practice and understanding of the syntax. So you can either pause this video and try write out function 1 and 2. I've given you instructions here, or you can just watch along with me. So the first one we're going to do is we're going to create I sounded Australian there. We're going to, at least I think I did. I probably didn't. But we're going to write a function called alert hello, which then alerts hello to the user. Obviously, we don't just want to create that function, we also want to call or invoke it, otherwise what's the point? And then we'll just create another function that has a few lines of a song. So we know how we can create a function. We use the keyword function, and I've given you the instruction, so it is alert hello. So now we're doing the function name, alert hello. We know it needs to have, we know that after the function name we need to have our parentheses, and then we have our curly braces, and in between the curly braces we can write our code. So we're not going to log it out to the console, we're actually going to alert it out to the user. So we're just going to say alert, parentheses, and our message will just be hello, and semicolon to end the statement. Now, if I save and refresh, nothing should happen because I've defined the function, but I haven't actually called or invoked it. So we have the function keyword, we have our function name, alert hello. Again, note the use of camel case, the H is uppercase, and we have our parentheses. We have our opening curly brace and our closing curly brace, but nowhere have we actually called the function. So basically what we've done is we have defined or created a function, but we have not actually called it. So to do that, we need to actually call or invoke the function. And all I need to do is just type out the function name and parentheses. So it is alert hello, parentheses, semicolon to end the statement. And if I save and refresh, we get this page says hello. Awesome. So congratulations, we have created a function and we've called or invoked the function. So that's awesome. Just for a bit more practice, let's create our next function. That it's called sing song or something. So we could say function sing song. It can just be sing, by the way. We'll make it a bit simpler. Let's just delete that there. Okay, awesome. So we have our parentheses, and this time instead of just having one single line of code, we'll do like multi-line. So this is a multi-line function, a function with more than one line of code. So what I'll do is I'll just do the lyrics of maybe like the final countdown from Europe, or Britney Spears, maybe oops, I did it again. So it's oops, I did it again. I played with your heart. I think the next lyrics are got lost in the game. Oh baby, baby, oops, you think I'm in love, that I'm sent from above. Am I singing oops, I did it again, or hit me baby one more time? I apologize, I'm a bit tired. I am a fan of Britney Spears, by the way. I should know that. But I can figure that out later. So basically what I've done is I've used the keyword function. I've called the function sing. We have our parentheses, we have our opening curly brace and our closing curly brace. And now we have 3 lines of code. We're just logging out, oops, I did it again to the console. I played with your heart, got lost in the game. That's oops, I did it again. Not hit me baby one more time. So then you call or invoke the function by writing out the name and then having the parentheses. So if I save and refresh, we get oops, I did it again. I played with your heart, got lost in the game. Oh baby, baby. I'm not going to win any awards for my singing. I know that. That's why I'm not doing karaoke. That's why I'm here making videos of JavaScript on YouTube. Okay, great. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. I'll see you in the next one where we'll actually create a more useful function now. Not that singing Britney Spears isn't useful. It's very fun at parties. But let's go create a dice roll function in the next tutorial. So I'll see you then. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, this is going to be a relatively interesting tutorial because what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that actually does something of real value, a function that's actually practical. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that basically rolls the dice for us and gets a number between 1 and 6. So you want to break this down. I've written out the pseudocode, i.e. the instructions in English for you to follow. So you're going to use the keyword function, and then you're going to create the function by first of all giving it a name. So you can call it roll dice, add parentheses. Then you're going to have your curly braces, okay, your code block. And inside of the code block, we just want to generate a random number using mat.random, okay? So we know when we use mat.random, we get a number between 0 and 1, inclusive of 0, but just below 1, okay? Then what we do is we can multiply this number by 6 and use mat.floor to round down. So what that'll do is that'll give us a number basically between 0 and 5. And all you need to do then is just add 1 at the end of the expression to get a number between 1 and 6, okay? Then what we can do is we can store that inside of a variable. Now, what I'd like you to do is, instead of us creating the function for the dice roll, and then we just, write out the function name, what I want us to do is, I actually want the user to decide how many times we're going to roll the dice. So we already know how we can get input from a user. We use the prompt, and then all we have to do is just convert that to type number. So let's get started. So what are we doing? Well, the first thing we have to do is we have to create our function. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do that. So we use the keyword function. I'm going to say roll dice. You want your function name to be intuitive. So, it does what it says in the tin, I suppose you could say. Roll dice, because that's what it's doing. We have our parentheses. We've seen this before. Then we have our curly braces. So now we've created a function called roll dice. Now it doesn't do anything because there's no code in between the curly braces, i.e. the code block. So what do we want to do here? Well, what we want to do is we want to generate a random number and store that in a variable. So we can say we'll say roll, dice, roll. We'll say roll, okay. And what's that going to be equal to? Well, we want this to be equal to a number between 1 and 6. So how do we do that? Well, we use mat.random. We say mat.random, okay? So now roll is going to have a value of between 0 and just under 1, okay? So what we want to do is we essentially want to multiply that by 5, okay? Now, what we can then do is wrap all of that inside of parentheses, okay, and floor it. Use mat.floor, and what this is going to do is this is going to throw away everything after the decimal place, okay? So mat.random gives us a number between 0 and 0.999, okay? We multiply it by 5, but we use mat.floor, so we're going to get a number between 0 and 5. Then what we can do is at the end of the expression, like I say, just add 1. So now instead of getting a number between 0 and 5, we actually get a number between 1 and 6, i.e. a dice roll. Then what we can do is just log out how many times the dice was rolled. Because I want to put a variable inside of a string sentence, I suppose you could say, use the backtick. So to the left of the number on your keyboard. So they're not single quotes, it's the backtick, okay? So we can say the dice was rolled, and we know if you want to embed a variable in a template literal, you just use the $, curly braces, and then the name of the variable, so roll. So the dice was rolled, well, no, this isn't, the dice was rolled, I don't want to say how many times it was rolled, I want to say what the value was. The dice was rolled, sorry, I'm just trying to phrase this, the dice roll was, the dice roll was, and then we get our answer, okay? Awesome. So what I want to do now is I just want to call or invoke that function. So just say roll dice, okay? And then parentheses. So what I'm doing here is I'm calling or invoking the function, basically getting the function to fire, to run. So we create our function, JavaScript reads it and says, okay, that's all well and good, that's fine, but you haven't invoked it. Here we actually call the function, by typing out the function name and then parentheses. So JavaScript then comes up here and it says, okay, function, roll dice, what do? It says, okay, mat.random times 5, floor it, then add 1, and then just log out the dice roll was, and then we get the answer. So if I save and refresh, we get the dice roll was 5, awesome, it was 3, it was 1, it was 2, etc. Okay, now what I want to do is I want the user to decide how many times to roll the dice. Okay, so that's what I want to do. So now I want to get the user to decide how many times to roll the dice. So how do we do that? Well, we know we need to get some sort of input from the user and then store that in a variable. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use prompt. Okay, we have our parentheses and we're just going to prompt the user to enter how many times they want to roll the dice. So we'll say, how many times do you want to roll the dice or the die? I say dice. So we have our prompt, right? But we need to store that in a variable. So we can say let times roll, how many times, what we call it? User rolls times to roll dice times roll be equal to prompt. Now, we've seen previously with prompt, even if the user enters a number on their keyboard, that'll be of type string. So what you want to do is just convert that to type number by wrapping all of that inside of parentheses. So what I've done here is I've said prompt. I'm prompting out to the screen to the user, how many times do you want to roll the dice? I convert it to I convert it to type number and then store it in the variable times roll. Okay. Now what we want to do is we want to actually use a loop, and the loop will call the function. So you see the way here I have roll dice. We don't want to manually type that out now. We want to run a for loop that runs as many times as the user has told it to run. So we've seen for loops before. So we can say for, use the for keyword, and we know that the for loop essentially has 3 expressions. So the first one is the counter variable. So we can say let counter, and I'll initialize this counter variable to have a value of 1. And how many times do we want to run the loop? Well, we want to run the loop as many times as the user wants to roll the dice, because you got to think about it like this. We're saying to a user, how many times do you want to roll the dice? Maybe they'll say 5 times. So you're going to be thinking, that's repeating code. That's a for loop, right? So now what we want to do is we want to run our loop in that situation 5 times. So you would run that while counter is less than or equal to times roll, the number of times the user wants to roll the dice. So remember, if counter was 1 the first time the loop runs and the user says 5, it'll run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times, assuming you've written the loop out correctly. So obviously the last expression here for the for loop syntax is, in this case, it's the increment operator. So this is the final expression. So we have basically our counter variable, our while condition, run the loop while some condition evaluates to true, that expression there. And then we have the final expression. What do we want to do after the loop runs? We just want to add to the counter. And then inside of here, what we can do is we can just call the function, right? Because remember, if we're saying to the user, how many times do you want to roll the dice? And they say 5, what code do we want to run inside of the for loop? We literally just want to call the function that we've written out above. So I'm just going to say roll dice. So I'll just delete the comments here, just so you can see all of the code together. So make it more concise. So I'll just review the code before I save and run it, make sure it's all good. So we've created a function here called roll dice. I've used the keyword function. We have our function name, roll dice, and our parentheses, because that is the structure of a function. We have our opening curly brace and our closing curly brace. So everything between the opening and closing curly brace is the code block, i.e. the code that will run when this function is called or invoked. So what we do is we're saying mat.random, so that gets us a number, as I say, between 0 and just under 1. We multiply it by 5, okay? Then we take all of that and we use mat.floor. So that throws away anything after the decimal place. So we get a number between 0 and 5. Then we just add 1 to it, so we get a number between 1 and 6. So that's basically us mimicking a dice in the real world. Then we just log out to the console. The dice roll was, okay? Then what we do is we ask the user, because now we've defined our function. The function is ready to be called. We want to say to the user, okay, how many times do you want to roll the dice? Maybe the user will say 5. So we have our message here. How many times do you want to roll the dice? Because of prompt. We convert that to type number and we store it in the variable times roll. So the reason we convert it to number is we're doing a check here. So I just want to make sure that if the user presses a number on their keyboard, instead of us getting it as a string, it is of type number. Then we store it in the variable that I've called times roll, okay? Then what we have is we have our for loop. And remember, loops are a great way to repeat code over and over again. So I don't want to type out roll dice repeatedly to call or invoke the function up here. We can just put that in a loop. So what we're doing is we are initializing our counter variable. We're saying let counter be equal to 1. And then we're going to run our loop while counter is less than or equal to times roll. So if the user pressed 10, for example, we're going to run the loop 10 times. So every time we run the loop, so while the counter variable is less than or equal to the number of times the user wants to roll the dice, we have roll dice here, and all we're doing here is we are calling the function that we've defined up here. And after we call that, we then increment our counter variable. The reason, by the way, it's less than or equal to, imagine the user was to press 1. How many times do you want to roll the dice? And they said 1. You want to run the loop at least 1 time. So then it would be counter is equal to 1. Is counter less than or equal to 1? Well, yes, 1 is equal to 1. Therefore, we call the function, we get whatever our dice roll is, we increment a counter variable, and we don't enter it again. Okay? So that's why it's less than or equal to. So let's see this in action. Hopefully this works. So if I refresh, how many times do you want to roll the dice? Let's say 5. Press OK. And we got the dice roll was 4 twice, it was 3 once, and it was 1 twice. Okay? Let's just do it again. How many times do you want to roll the dice? Let's say 5 again. And we get, okay, look at that. The dice roll was 5, 4, 2, 3, 2. Okay, that was interesting. And one more time, I'm going to run it 10 times. And we get the dice roll was 4, 2, 3, 2, 1, 5. Awesome. Okay, so guys, that is just a very basic dice roll in JavaScript. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial because we really did a few things here. We got user input, then because of that user input, we decide how many times we're going to run a for loop, i.e. how many times to roll the dice, and we create a function here that basically just mimics a real world dice roll. So we're finally in this course now starting to put things together. In this course now, in this tutorial, congratulations, you've created a function that actually does something of value, i.e. a dice roll. We've asked the user how many times they want to roll the dice, and we've set up the logic so that how many times they want to roll the dice, we actually do it. Later on in the course, we'll actually create a user interface where you actually see dice, but that's not for a few tutorials. So I'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching. Okay, in this tutorial, we're going to start learning about functions with parameters. So what do I mean? Well, so far in this chapter of the course, we've seen how we can create a function. We now know together that we can use the keyword function, have some sort of function name, so say hello or say hi, and then inside of curly braces, we can write our code inside of the code block where we say hello you to the user, okay? Semicolon to end the statement. So we've seen this before. So we have our function keyword, we have say hello, our function name, we have our parentheses, we have our opening curly brace and our closing curly brace, then we have our code here, okay? So hopefully by now you know if I save and refresh and look at the browser, nothing is going to happen. And that is because while we have defined or created our function, we haven't called or invoked it. So we know that to call or invoke the function, all we need to do is just write out the name of the function followed by parentheses. So if I just type it out, semicolon to end statement, we see that we then call our function. And like I've said previously, you can call a function multiple times. So therefore, I've written the function once, but I call upon it 3 different times. And if I refresh, we get hello you 3 times. Okay, that's awesome. Now, here's the problem. In the real world, you're going to want to pass real life data into a function. So for example, maybe you want to pass in a number and double it. Maybe you want to pass in an age and do some sort of calculation with that age, or maybe you want to pass in someone's name. Maybe you want to pass in two numbers and add them together. So far, we have not been able to do that based on the functions we have written because they were functions that didn't take in any data. So now what we're going to do is we're going to create a function. We're going to start learning about parameters and arguments in JavaScript, and we're going to pass in our first argument to a function. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function whereby we can pass in someone's name and the function will just say hello name. So how do we do that? Well, what we do is we use the keyword function like we saw previously. Then we have a function name, so say hello. But this time, inside of the parentheses, instead of leaving the parentheses empty, we're going to type out a parameter. So that is our parameter. And now, when the function is called or invoked, we can actually pass in a name, such as a string, like Batman or Jessica or John, to our say hello function. So now what we can do is, in our function, we can say console.log. Let's use the backtick beside the number 1 on the keyboard, and we'll say hello, and then whatever name, the value that was passed in. So we know that with the backticks, if we use the $sign and then curly braces, we can just log out name. Okay. Alternatively, you could do console.log a string and then just have hello, comma, and then the name. So now, what we've done is we've created a function and it has a parameter. Okay, so this name here is a parameter. So note that the parameter here is called name. So therefore, inside of the function, I have to refer to whatever I've called it. So name is called name there as well, because that's what I've decided to call the parameter. So basically, the parameter is just a placeholder. Okay, what do you want to call the data that's being passed in? Okay, so now what I do is, to call or invoke the function, I still write out the name of the function, okay? But instead of having empty parentheses, we don't do that, we pass in data. So I could pass in, for example, Batman. Now what I've done is, I'm calling and invoking the function, okay? The function that's defined up here, and I'm passing the value of Batman into the function. So now, when I save and refresh, we should see hello, Batman. Okay? Whoops, not dealt. Apologies about that. I'll just minimize. So now, if I refresh, we get hello, Batman. Okay? So I know this is a bit confusing when you first see it, but the key point away is this. Just for now, be aware of the fact that you are able to pass real-world data into functions, such as strings, numbers, whatever the case may be. It's pretty much the same idea of how we've seen functions so far. You have the function keyword, you have some sort of function name. The only difference is this time we have defined a parameter. So we just call it name, and then inside of our code, we're just saying console.log hello, name, whatever is passed in. Now, just so you're aware, this name here has been defined as a parameter. A function parameter is basically the name that is listed in the function that we've created, or the function definition. So name is a parameter, but when we pass data into the function, we pass data in as an argument. So Batman is the data being passed into the function, so Batman is the argument being passed in, but name here is the parameter, okay? So you might hear the terms parameter and argument used interchangeably by people. I'm going to basically do that for this course, but the key difference is this. The argument is a reference to the data that's been passed in this case Batman, and the parameter is basically what the function is expecting to receive. So it's passed in as an argument, it's received as an argument, but this name here is the parameter that's been defined, okay? It's basically a placeholder for how are we going to refer to the data. So I obviously can't call it, Batman here, because maybe I want to pass in Jessica, right? And just so you know, you can pass in different names to this function. You don't just have to pass in Batman. So we could pass in Jessica. So now what I've done here is I've passed in Batman as an argument to the function, and here what I've done is I've passed in Jessica to the function. And remember, Batman and Jessica are both arguments being passed into the function. They are received by the function as an argument, but name is just a parameter. It is a reference to the data that's being passed in, so we can do something with it. If that was a bit confusing, don't worry about it. We're going to see functions now with parameters and arguments over the next few tutorials to get a bit more practice. So I'll see you in the next one. Okay, so in the last tutorial we saw how we can create a function that is expecting to receive some sort of argument passed in. Okay, so in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're actually going to create a function that is actually just going to receive a number passed in. So we'll create a function called square numbers. We'll pass in a number because a number squared is just a number times itself. That'll be pretty straightforward. And then what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that actually has two parameters. So we've that to look forward to in this tutorial. Okay, so just for a bit of practice, what we're going to do is we're just going to create a function. I'm going to call it square numbers. We'll have our parentheses. I'm just going to call the parameter number. Then we have our curly braces, and we'll just console.log number, so the parameter times itself. Then we'll just pass in a few different numbers to that function that we've created. And then finally, we'll speak about creating a function that is expecting to receive in two arguments. Okay? So we use function, the keyword, and I'm going to call this function square numbers. Okay, then we have our parentheses. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give the parameter a name. Remember, a parameter is just a placeholder, and I'm just going to call it number. Then inside of curly braces, we are going to write out the code for our function. So we're just going to log out the value of whatever number is passed in as an argument squared. Okay, so 2 squared is 4, 5 squared is 25, etc. Okay, 4 squared I believe is 16. Yeah, okay, squared is just a number times itself. So console.log, it's going to be number. I'm holding down shift and pressing 8 on the keyboard to get the little star or asterisk, and then number, and then semicolon to end the statement. So what we've done is we've created our function using the keyword function. We have square numbers, that's the name of the function. This function is expecting to receive a parameter, okay, called number. And because I've defined or called the parameter number, and remember it's really just a placeholder, this is what we're going to, how we're going to refer to whatever data is passed in as an argument. Because I've called the parameter number, I have to be consistent. So down here it's also called number. So let's just pass in a few different values to the function. So let's just pass in the number 2. So what we're doing here is we're just passing in the number 2 to the function above. So here we've created the function, and here we are basically just passing in the data. And it's actually, so that's brilliant, I made a mistake. So this isn't going to work because I've actually called the I've referred to the wrong function. There's no square number function, it's called square numbers. Square number, yeah, let's take away the S. So that is the first lesson of JavaScript. Make sure you are naming everything correctly and spelling it. So the function is now called square number, and I'm calling square number by typing out the name of the function and then passing in to the number as an argument to the function. And this function appears expecting to receive a parameter. Remember, when it's passed in as an argument, and then we just log out console.log number times number. In this case, it'll be 2 times 2, which will be 4. So if I come down to, hi Batman, to the browser and refresh, we get 4, okay? So we can call or invoke this function again by simply typing out the name of the function, but instead of passing in 2, we'll pass in 4. So again, all we're doing is we're passing in the number 4 to the function above as an argument, okay? As an argument, okay? So now what we're doing is we're just passing in 4 to our function. And remember, this function's square number, it is expecting to receive a parameter called number, and then we just log out const.log number times number. Okay, so if I just save and refresh, we see we get 4 and then we get 16. We'll do it one more time for practice. If I can just copy that, come down here, square number, and we'll pass in 10. Why not? So if I save and refresh, we now get 100. Okay, awesome. I tell you what, we'll leave that tutorial there. I'll see you in the next one where we'll talk about creating a function where we're passing in 2 arguments. So the function is expecting to, the function will have 2 parameters. That was just a bit of practice. So I'll see you in the next one. Okay, in this tutorial, we're just going to create a function that actually takes in, in this tutorial, we're going to create a function. We're going to have 2 parameters defined. So this function is going to expect to receive 2 arguments as parameters being passed into the function. So what I want to do is, I just want to create a function called add numbers. We'll have 2 parameters, number 1 and number 2. Then we'll just log out the result of when you add the 2 numbers together. Okay, so hopefully your confidence is being built up now as we get more experience creating functions. Once we have all the building blocks, we can then start creating more interesting functions, like a function that makes a call to an API and gets real-world data. So, that's kind of longer term what we're trying to build up to here. So we have our function keyword. Then we have our function name. We've seen this before. So we have add numbers is what we're going to call this function. And this function is going to expect to receive 2 parameters here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to call them number 1, comma separate number 2. Okay? And then all I want to do is just log out to the console the results of number 1 plus number 2 and semicolon to end the statement. So number 1, this parameter here, is a reference to whatever number is passed in first. When the user calls or invokes the function, but we're just going to pass in the numbers directly. So when we pass in a number, the first number is being passed in as number 1, and that's number 1 there. And the second number we pass in will be passed in as number 2, and that's a reference to number 2 there. So then all we do is just log out the value of the numbers. Okay, so hopefully this is getting more familiar to you now. So if we want to pass 2 numbers into this function, we know that we first of all have to call or invoke the function. So I'm going to say add numbers, the function name, parentheses, and I'm going to pass in the number 100 and the number 150, semicolon to end the statement. So this 100 is being passed into the function as an argument, and this 150, that number, is also being passed in to the function add numbers as an argument. This function is expecting to receive 2 arguments, and of course then once we're in the function then they are parameters. Okay, so we're adding parameter 1, number 1, and parameter 2, number 2. So the result of this should be that we're just logging out to the console 250. So if I save, refresh, and come down to the console, or to the browser, sorry, we get 250. We can call or invoke the function again, add numbers. So maybe we're adding 500 and 404, semicolon to end the statement. That should give us 904. So if I come down to Google Chrome and refresh, we get 904. Okay, awesome. Now, the next thing I want to do is I just want to show you that the order in which data is passed in to the function actually matters. So what I want to do is I want to actually just create a template literal here. So template literal, and I'm going to say the result of the operation of adding, and then I want to have number 1. So remember, if we want to embed a variable into a template literal, we just use the $sign and the curly braces. So number 1 and number 2 is, and then all I want to do here is just add number 1 plus number 2. So I hope that makes sense. I'll just talk through what's happening. So we've used the function keyword to create a function. We've given the function a name called add numbers. Then we've defined our parentheses, opening parentheses and closing parentheses, and we've created our 2 parameters here. So number 1 and number 2. So the first number passed into the add numbers function as an argument, number 1 is a reference to that, and number 2 is the reference or the parameter to the second variable that's passed in. So we're going to log out to the console. The result of the operation of adding number 1 and number 2 is, and the results. So you should see an order 100 and then 150. If I save and refresh, we get the result of the result of the operation of adding 100 and 150 is 250. Okay, but if I was to change these numbers around, so pass in 150 first and then 100, while we're still going to get the same end result, what you'll notice is we're going to be seeing 150 before 100. You see that? The result of the operation of adding 150 and 100 is 250. So the key point I'm trying to make here is that the order in which you pass in arguments to the function is the order in which the function is expected to receive them. So remember, this parameter here, number 1, that will always be a reference to the first argument passed in, and this parameter here, number 2, will be a reference to the second argument passed in. And remember, when I say argument, I'm really just referring to the data that's being passed in this case, numbers. Okay, that was awesome. See you in the next tutorial. Okay, so in this tutorial, we are going to learn how we can create a function with 3 parameters, a function that is expecting to receive 3 bits of data essentially passed in as arguments. Okay, so we should be able to do this now because we've seen various functions over the last 2 tutorials. So what you do is you use the function keyword, then we have our function name, whatever you want to call the function. We're just going to call it add numbers. We're going to create a function that takes in 3 numbers as arguments. So we have to define our parameters and then just add them together. So I can say function add numbers. So it's going to expect number 1, number 2, number 3. Okay, so these are just parameters or placeholders. And then what we can do is just log out the results of the operation. So we can say the numbers added together equal. I could have used a template literal here as well, but this is fine the way I'm doing it. So now we just want to get the result of the operation, i.e. add number 1 plus number 2 plus number 3. Okay, so all we've done is we have defined or created a function called add numbers. It is expecting to receive in 1, 2, 3 arguments. So 3 arguments are going to be passed in, and then inside of the function, inside of the curly braces or the code block, we just log out to the console, the numbers added together equal, and then all we're doing is just getting a reference to the parameters. So number 1 is that number 1 there, the first number passed in, number 2 is a reference to that parameter, and number 3 here is a reference to whatever data is passed in as an argument. We're going to then refer to it as number 3. So what we can do then is just pass in 3 numbers. So let's say add numbers, and whatever numbers come to mind, I'll say 15, 100, and 1000. Okay, so here to call or invoke this function, what you do is you just type out the name of the function, add numbers, and then pass in the 3 different numbers you want to pass in as arguments. So 15 has been passed in as an argument here, 100 has been passed in as an argument, been passed into there, and 1000, because it's in position 3, is being passed in as an argument to here. So really what we're saying then is the numbers added together equal, and we're getting 15 plus 100 plus 1000 and add them together. So I think we should get 1115, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know, I should probably have more coffee. Let's save and refresh. and we get the numbers added together equal 1,115. And remember, the order in which you pass in arguments to a function with parameters matters. So suppose what I could do is I could just comment that out, and let's create another function with 3 parameters. We'll do it of type string. So we'll say function tell story. So we're going to have a character's name, a city, and the food they ate, right? So now what we're going to do is we're just going to create a little story here. So console.log, because I want to have 3 different pieces of text, let's do a template literal, just the easiest way to embed. Okay, so we'll say, so the first variable is the name, name of the person. So name went to city and ate some food. So $. Remember, when you want to embed variables into a string, what you can do is you can use a template literal. So these are not actually single quotes. They are backticks, which you can find by pressing the number to the left of the number 1 on your keyboard. Okay? Right. Now, the reason I've created this function with 3 different parameters is I just want to emphasize how the order in which we pass in arguments to the function matters. So if I say tell story, right? If I want to say Jessica went to city Paris and ate some, I don't want to say pizza because that would kind of make more sense if that was Italy. So now we're telling a story. We're passing in Jessica's name. So if we log this out to the console, it's going to be Jessica went to Paris and ate some snails. So if I save and refresh, we should get Jessica went to Paris and ate some snails. Okay, awesome. We could do one with Batman. So to call or invoke a function, remember, just type out the name of the function, and this function is expecting to receive 3 arguments passed into it, and it's going to receive them, okay, as arguments, and we've defined our parameters here. So we'll say Batman went to Rome and ate some pizza. I don't know why I always feel the need to make a reference to the DC universe in these tutorials. Oh well. So Batman went to Rome and ate some pizza. Now, what you'll notice is the order in which you pass in the data matters, right? So if I was to say, you know, Paris, and then do pizza, and then do Superman, I mean, that just makes absolutely no sense, right? Because what's going to happen now is we're going to log out to the console. Paris went to pizza and ate some Superman. Oh my God, that's not good. Well, that's just gibberish, right? So Paris went to pizza and ate some Superman. So the key point I'm trying to emphasize here is when you call or invoke a function, when you call or invoke a function that is expecting to receive some arguments passed into it, the order in which you pass in the data as arguments matters, okay? So the first time we called or invoked the function, it made sense. Jessica was passed in as name, Paris is the city, snails is food, so it read, Jessica went to Paris and ate some snails. But when we did it here, we didn't pass in the data in an appropriate manner, so we got Paris went to pizza and ate some Superman. That makes no sense. So really, you just want to make sure that you get the order that you're passing in data to a function correct. So Superman went to Paris and ate some pizza. Let's just do snails. Okay, he's going to meet up with Jessica. They're both in Paris and now they're both having snails. And get rid of that comma there or we're going to have an error. So remember, we've wrote out the name of the function here. I'm just going to delete these 2 lines to make it easier. Sorry, Jessica, I guess you're not meeting up with Superman. I'd be upset too. So we're passing in Superman as an argument to the function. We have our name parameter defined here. So it's Superman went to Paris. Paris is passed in when we call or invoke the function here. we're passing in Paris as an argument to the function, and then city is the parameter that's defined. So city is a reference to whatever is passed in this case Paris. So Superman went to Paris and ate some, and we pass in snails here as an argument to this function. The function receives it as an argument, but we call the parameter food. So remember, parameter is just a way of saying a placeholder. How do you want to reference all the data being passed in this position here? Okay, so that's all that is. So now we're going to get Superman went to Paris and ate some snails. Okay, so if I save and refresh, we get Superman went to Paris and ate some snails. Little challenge for you. I want you to send Jessica to Paris as well, because I feel her and Superman, I don't want them, I don't want them having snails by themselves. Let's have snails with a friend. She can order fries. Jessica is her own woman. She doesn't need to eat snails. So now we have Superman went to Paris and ate some snails, and Jessica went to Paris and ate some fries. So what you notice is we really can pass in whatever data we want to the function, because here we passed in Superman, but here we passed in Jessica. Superman and Jessica, well, they both went to Paris. Superman had snails, but Jessica had fries. Key takeaway from this tutorial: you can create a function with 3 parameters defined, and the order in which you pass in the data matters. I hope you've enjoyed the last few tutorials. We've now covered a lot of the basics of functions. You've seen now how to create a function with no parameters, with 1, 2, and finally here 3 parameters. We're going to start doing some more useful real-world examples now with functions, such as how to calculate the area of a circle or a rectangle or a triangle, those kind of things. But we do have to cover the return keyword as well, so we'll talk about that in the next tutorial. Okay, so in this tutorial we're going to learn about the return keyword, or the return statement in JavaScript. So this is the return keyword. So why does it matter? Well, so far in this course we've covered some very basic functions. Hopefully you're feeling a bit more confident with, the very basic syntax of a function. When I say syntax, I basically mean the rules of structuring the code. You know that you can use the keyword function. You know that a function has some sort of name, parentheses, you can pass parameters in, and you basically can write out your code within the function between the opening and closing curly brace, and you know that later on you can call or invoke the function, and you've seen now how to pass data into a function as an argument. But there's one massive limitation based on what we've learned so far. In the real world, you might want to pass data into a function, ask the function to evaluate the code, and then return some sort of output to you that you can then go on and make a decision with. So for example, maybe we're working for a real estate firm, and what we want to do is we want to see if someone has a down payment. They use that term in North America, down payment. I don't know about Australia. In Europe we say a deposit mainly. But maybe they need to have 50,000 US dollars for them to be allowed view an apartment or a condominium or whatever the case may be. So far in this course, all we'd be able to do is pass data into a function and then log it out to the console. We don't really know how to get that data back. And that brings us to the return keyword in JavaScript. So let me do an example of us doing a calculation and then show you the limitations based on what we've learned so far and why the return keyword is our friend. Let's say we want to just do a calculation. We want to check to see if someone has a down payment, okay? We could say function, we'll call it calculate savings or calculate deposit or something like that. And we're going to pass in 2 arguments to this function because we're trying to see how much someone has saved. We're going to basically ask them how much have they saved per month and how many months have they been saving for. So we could say amount, amount saved per month, and then months. And inside of our curly braces, what we can do is we can create a deposit variable. So we can say let deposit be equal to amount, how much they've saved per month, times the number of months they have saved, okay? And then what we can do is just log out to the console the results. So we could say the person has saved, and then we just have deposit. Remember, deposit is just the results of our operation, okay? So basically what we're doing is we've used the function keyword. We've called our function calculate savings. Note the use of camel case. The second word begins with a capital letter. And then we have our two parameters defined there. So we have the amount saved per month, and we have the number of months they've been saving. Then we just do a very basic calculation. We basically just multiply the amount they've saved per month by the number of months they've been saving for, and we store it in a variable called deposit or result. Then we just say console.log the person has saved whatever the result is. I'm going to actually change that to results, okay? Trying to just make this as straightforward as possible. So what I can do now is I can just call or invoke that function. If I say calculate savings, maybe this person got an extra job, so they're able to save 500 a month, and maybe they've been saving for 60 months. They've been saving for quite some time. What we can do is we can just check to see how much they've saved, right? So if I just come up here, we see the person has saved 30,000. Okay, that's awesome. But what if I then wanted to do something with that 30,000? Maybe I wanted to pass it into an if statement to check to see if they're allowed to view the apartment we're trying to sell. Well, we haven't got the data back. This is the problem. We've passed data into the function, so 500 a month and 60. Remember, the 500 is passed up here as an argument, and the 60 is passed up there to this parameter as an argument. Then what we did is we just got the result. But we log it out to the console. We don't actually do anything with it. So how do we get it back? Well, what we can do is, instead of logging that out to the console, what we can do is we can actually return results. So what I can do is I can say return results. And now what this function is going to do is it's going to return that to us. So then what I can do is actually store whatever the function gives back to us in a variable. So I could say let results be equal to calculate savings. And now if I log out to the console this variable here, that result, we're going to get our answer. So if I say console.log results, we're going to get the answer. So if we just save and refresh, we get 30,000, okay? Now, the reason this is so exciting is before we actually returned the data to us, okay, we didn't actually have access to this result variable there outside of the curly braces. So for example, if I just delete return results, so now the function no longer returns data to us, okay, and if I just delete that, okay, if I try to log out to the console now result, we're actually going to get an error, right? I'll prove this to you, and then I'll show you why. So we get an error, result is not defined. And this is because of something we covered a few tutorials ago called block scope. And it gets back to that concept of global and local variables. This result variable here exists locally within the opening and closing curly brace, i.e. within the scope of this function, but it doesn't exist outside of it. Remember, if I was to create a variable like this, that is a global variable because this name variable has been defined in the root of the document. It hasn't been declared and initialized within, let's say, a block, whether it's a function or an if statement, etc. It's been declared in the root of the document, i.e. outside of curly braces is one way I like to think about it. So the problem with how we've been writing functions so far is, say you want to pass in data, get some results, maybe, you know, in this scenario, how much someone has saved after a period of time. We can't actually, you know, log out that results variable because results only exist locally. It doesn't exist globally. So that is why it's so cool that we now have the ability to say return results. And now what we could do is, because we've returned that, we can actually store it inside of a variable. So we'll say let deposit be equal to. So what's happening now is, right, when we call or invoke this function calculate savings, we're passing in 500 as an argument, which is received here to the amount parameter, and we're passing in 60, the number of months they've been saving, as an argument to the months parameter. Then we do the calculation. We times how much they've saved per month by the number of months. We've stored it in this result variable. Remember, this result variable only exists locally within the function. Then we return result. And when we return something from a function, we can actually store it in a variable by saying let variable name be equal to the result of the operation. And now here we say console.log results. So result has a value. Result is not defined. Oh, sorry, apologies. I was supposed to say console.log deposit there. Yeah, awesome. So now we console.log deposit. We could actually call it results as well if you wanted, but deposit is fine. So if we save now, we get 30,000. And the great thing about this is we can now make a decision on that. So maybe we want to make a decision, are we going to let them view the apartment or not? So we could say if deposit is greater than or equal to 50,000, console.log, you can visit the condo. Else, if they haven't saved that, we'll just say, sorry, you have to keep saving. Console.log, sorry, you have to keep saving. Don't worry, we'll do a little happy example after this. So basically now what's happening is we've actually returned data to us, so we're actually able to now make a decision based on what's happened. So in this case, we see here, we're not letting them view the apartment because they haven't basically saved enough. Say hypothetically they were able to actually, save for a longer period of time, maybe 120 months. If we now then save and refresh, the deposit should have a value now of 60,000, and we can say you can visit the condo because we're trying to sell it to them. Okay, awesome. So guys, I'll leave that tutorial for there. The key point about this tutorial is you're actually able to return data from a function and do something with it. And by the way, just to make the notation a bit more shorthand, you don't actually have to store the result of your operation inside of a variable, see the way here I've said let result equal to amount times months, and then I've just returned results. You don't have to do that if you want. What you can do is you can just return this directly. So what I can do is, let's delete that line, and let's just say return, and I'll just delete the parentheses, so that'll still work for us, okay? So basically what I'm doing is, instead of basically multiplying the amount they've saved per month times the number of months, and then storing it in a variable called result, and then returning results, we can just return it directly like that. And that will still work for us. And to prove it, if I save and refresh, I should not get any errors. And we see here, we don't get any errors. And by the way, when you return from a function, you actually basically leave the function. So anything after it is known as unreachable code. So if I was to try, say, console.log hello world, after we've returned, a value from a function, you'll notice here that basically it's kind of grayed out a little bit by Visual Studio Code, and we're getting unreachable code detected. So basically what I'm trying to say is just make sure you're aware of that when you return some sort of value or data from a function, anything you're going to leave the function. JavaScript will stop running the code within the function. It's going to return, it's going to exit out. So any code you write underneath the return statement in a function is unreachable code. It'll never execute, essentially. So that was a lot to take in. That is the return keyword in JavaScript. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. The key point here now is you've learned a new superpower. Instead of passing data into a function, doing something with it, and maybe just logging the result out to the console, you're now able to get data passed in, but also returned back to you, and then you can store that in a variable the way we did here, and then go on and make some sort of decision with that, okay? So it's very useful, especially as you start writing more advanced programs and algorithms in JavaScript. I'll leave that tutorial there, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, in this tutorial, what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that calculates the area of a rectangle. We're going to be using the keyword return as well in this tutorial. So finally, we're going to actually create a function that has some sort of real world application, calculating the area of a rectangle. That could actually be useful. So we're going to create a function that does that. So we've that to look forward to in this tutorial. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the function keyword, and our function is going to be called calculate area. We're going to have our parentheses, and we're going to have two parameters. Now, the area of a rectangle is simply width times height, so they will be our parameter names. Then what we're going to do is when we call or invoke the function and we pass the data in to our function, the data will obviously be passed in as arguments. We're going to do our calculation, just return it, and then we'll log that out to the console. We're obviously going to, when we call or invoke the function, store the result in a variable. So let's get started. I'm just going to say function. So we've seen this before many times. We use the function keyword to create a function. Now we have our function name. I'm going to say calculate area. Then we're going to have our parentheses and our curly braces. Now we know we have to pass in two pieces of data to this function as arguments, the width and the height. So we'll say width, that will be one parameter, and height will be the next parameter. Then what we can do is we can say let result, the result of the operation, be equal to width times height. So we're just getting reference to the parameters there. So whatever is passed in as arguments to the function, we have to make a reference to them. So the first piece of data passed in will be called width, and the second will be called height. So we're just multiplying those together. And then what we can do is just return the results. Awesome. And we saw in the last tutorial that any code written under the return keyword will be unreachable code. So that is our function. So now that we have defined our function, so we have defined a function that calculates the area of a rectangle, right? Now that we've done that, what we need to do is we need to call or invoke the function and pass in the data to it. So what we can do is we can just say calculate area. We're going to call or invoke the function, and we'll just say the rectangle has a width of, let's say, 120 and a height of, let's say, 45. Now, what we can do is we can store the result of that in results. So we can say let rectangle area be equal to whatever the result is, and then we'll just log out to the console. The area of the rectangle is rectangle area. So I'll just talk you through this before we have a look at the console. I've used the function keyword, okay, because we know we need to create a function. I've called our function calculate area. Please note the use of camel case. The A is a capital. Then we have our opening parentheses and our closing parentheses, because we know with function syntax we do need to have parentheses. We have our first parameter defined here and our second parameter. Then we have the opening curly brace and the closing curly brace. And inside of the function, what we do is we say let result be equal to width times height. We store that in the result variable, and then we just return results. So now here what we're saying is we're saying we're creating a variable called rectangle area, and we're assigning that the value of whatever this calculation is. So when we say calculate area, we're calling or invoking the function here. We're passing in 120 as an argument received by the function as the width parameter here. Passed in as an argument, received as an argument, but you refer to it here as a parameter. And 45 is being passed in as an argument here. It's being passed in to the function. It's received here by the function, the 45, but we get a reference to it as height. So width times height, 120 times 45, is stored in the result variable. We return it, and then that is then stored in rectangle area, the variable, and then we just log out to the console. The area of the rectangle is rectangle area. So if I save and refresh, we get the area of the rectangle is 5,400. And if you wanted to make this more concise, you could do all of this in one line. So there's no need to do the calculation, restore it in a result variable and return the results variable. What we can do essentially is just delete that and delete that and just put the return keyword up there. Okay, so now what we're doing is instead of multiplying width by height, storing it in a variable saying let result be equal to and then return results, we're just returning that directly. Okay, returning the outcome of the calculation, and that will still work. So if I save and refresh, we get no errors. And if I was to, let's say, change the calculations, maybe pass in 140 as the width and 45 as the height, this should still work for us. So now we get the area of the rectangle is 6,300. Okay, awesome. Congratulations. We've now created a really cool function that has a real world application. We've created a function that calculates the area of a rectangle. So that was awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to write a function that calculates the area of a circle in JavaScript. So the equation for calculating the area of a circle is just pi r squared. So basically it's just multiplying 3.14 by the radius of the circle you want to calculate to the power of 2. Okay, so pi r squared. Now, in the last tutorial we saw how we can calculate the area of a triangle and we passed in 2 arguments. For this we only have to pass in 1 argument, but to make it a bit more interesting, I want us to prompt the user to ask them what radius they want to calculate. So we're going to do some sort of prompt, please enter the radius. We'll convert that to type number. We'll store that in a variable. We're going to call it user radius. Then what we'll do is we'll pass that user radius as an argument into the function. So this sounds pretty complicated, so let's just break it down. So like we've seen in the last few tutorials, if we use the function keyword, we can create a function. I'm going to call the function calculate area. Again, note the use of camel case. The second word in the function has a capital letter. Then we have our parentheses. So we know we need to define one parameter here. We'll just call it radius. And then we have our curly braces where we can write our code, i.e. the code that will execute whenever the function is called or invoked. So what we can do is we can just say let result be equal to 3.14 times the radius to the power of 2. And then you can return results. But what we can do instead of that is just do it all in one line. So I'll just say return, and we're going to just take 3.14, I think it's 159, is it? Yeah. Then what we're going to do is just multiply that by the radius to the power of 2. So that should get us the results, return the area of a circle. So if we were to call or invoke the function, we'd just say calculate area now, the function name, and just pass in some sort of number, 10, 15, 100, whatever the case may be. But rather than doing that, I want to actually prompt the user. So we've seen prompt before. We can just say prompt this inbuilt power in JavaScript. We have our parentheses because we're going to have some sort of string message, prompted to the user. So we'll say, please enter the radius of the circle, or something like that, semicolon to end statement. But what I want to do is I want to wrap all of this inside of number. So instead of getting a string, we get a number. So we have our open parentheses there and our closing parentheses. And then what we can do is just take all of this and store it in a variable. So I'm just going to say let user radius be equal to whatever the user has typed in. So here we are getting the user to decide the radius, okay? And then all I'm going to do is basically pass in that radius to calculate area. So we know how to do that. Calculate area is the name of the function. So we use parentheses to pass in some sort of argument, and we're just going to pass in user radius, And then what we're going to do is we're going to store that in a results variable. So we'll say let results be equal to whatever the outcome is. And then we can just console.log whatever the result was. So we can say the area of the circle is, and we want to just log out results. So let me just talk you through all of this again. Basically, we've used the keyword function to create a function. We've called the function calculate area. Note the use of the uppercase A there because it's the second word. Then we have our parentheses. This function is going to receive one argument passed into it, i.e. the radius of a circle. So we've only defined one parameter here. Then we have our opening curly brace and we have our closing curly brace. What we do then is we just use the standard formula to calculate the area of a function. So it's pi. A lot of people know that pi is 3.14. That's a typo. I think that should be 159. Yeah. So pi is 3.14159, etc., etc. Times, so we use the little asterisk, press Shift 8 on your keyboard, times the radius to the power of 2. So 2 asterisks there, Shift 8 twice. Then what we're doing is we take all of this calculation and we use the return keyword. So when this function, this entire function is called upon, we calculate the area of a circle and we return it. So this function is basically calculating the area of a circle and it returns it, which is pretty awesome. Then what we do is we prompt the user. We use prompt. We say, please enter the radius of a circle. We convert it to type number, because remember, if they press a number on their keyboard, that's actually of type string, so we convert to number. Then we just store it inside of this variable user radius. And this is really cool because for the first time this course, we've actually passed a variable into a function as an argument. So that's pretty cool. So rather than us just, writing out calculate area and passing in a number ourselves, we're actually for the first time ever in this course passing in a variable to a function. That's pretty cool. Then we store it in the results variable here. We say let results be equal to whatever the function calculates, and then we just log out to the console. The area of the circle is results. So let me save and refresh. Let's go to the Google Chrome, the browser. If I refresh, it says please enter the radius of the circle. I'm going to say 105. Press OK, and we get the area of the circle is this number here. And if I save and refresh, maybe we do a smaller number. I'll just do 4. Press OK. We get the area of the circle is 50. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is how we can create a function to calculate the area of a circle. And instead of just passing in the radius ourselves, we actually got the user to basically decide what the radius was. We store that in a variable called user radius, and we passed in that variable into the function. Okay, awesome. Thank you. I'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're actually going to combine what we've learned over the last couple of tutorials. We had one tutorial where we created a function that could calculate the area of a rectangle, and we created another function whereby we were able to calculate the area of a circle. So what I want to do in this tutorial is create a program, a very basic program, whereby we actually prompt the user to have a choice. The user can choose between entering a circle or a rectangle. So if the user says circle, we say please enter a radius, and then we log out the area to the console. However, if they say rectangle, we then prompt them to enter a width and a height. And then we give the area. Alternatively, if they don't enter either, or they make a mistake, maybe they say hello, they don't choose circle or rectangle, we say you did not choose correctly. So I'm going to show you the code I wrote to create this program. Don't be intimidated by it. I'm also sure there are better ways to write this, but there's so many different ways to write code in JavaScript. So basically what I'm doing is I'm just moving a glass down from my table. It's just taking a lot of space. I have OCD. Okay, so basically what I've done is you saw the prompt, please enter circle or rectangle. So I use basically, you can do window.prompt or you can just do prompt. So I said prompt, please enter circle or rectangle. Then what we do is we store that in user decision. We create a variable. We say let user decision be equal to that prompt. Then what we do is we let user decision be equal to itself, i.e. user decision, but we use dot to uppercase. So that is to make sure that if they enter circle all lowercase or one capital letter, you know, wherever the case would be, we're just converting it to capital letters for circle and rectangle to make it easier for our if statement to do the checks. So if they enter rectangle, so if user decision is equal to rectangle or strictly equal to, we enter this code block here. So this is probably one of the biggest code blocks we've ever seen. We have the opening curly brace and the closing curly brace. So all I do really is just have the function we had previously. We have function calculate rectangle area. We enter width and height are the two parameters there to be passed in as arguments. Then we just return width times height. Okay? So when the user enters a width, we store that in the width variable. When they enter a height, we store that in the height variable. Then what we do is we pass in the width and height to the calculate rectangle area function up there. So we've seen how to pass in variables to a function before. Then what we do is we just store it in a result variable and we log out to the console. The area is result. Alternatively, if the user chose circle, we just say else if user decision is strictly equal to circle. We've created our function here inside of this code block, so that opening curly brace and that closing curly brace. We basically just do our function called calculate circle area. We have our radius and we just return pi times radius to the power of whoops, that should be to the power of 2. That's what's known as a logical error, where there was technically no error in the code in the sense that nothing was breaking, but it wasn't doing what it was supposed to do. So that's a logical error. Apologies about that. Then we have our radius. So we say let radius be equal to whatever the user enters. So we store that in the variable radius. And then what we do is essentially we just pass in radius to the calculate circle area function. We store that in results, and then we just log out the result, console.log, the area is results. And remember, this result here is that result because it has been defined locally within the code block. So that result is not that result, for example, okay? Any variable defined within a code block is a local variable only, not accessible outside that code block. We've seen that before. And then finally, I just finish with an else, basically saying, you know, you did not choose correctly if they don't spell rectangle correctly or circle. So we're going to code that up now in this tutorial. Obviously, that's probably one of the longest pieces of code we have written so far in this course. So I will paste this in the comments section. Okay, so let's delete all of that and start from scratch. Well, the first thing we know we need to do is we need to prompt the user to enter circle or rectangle. So I will say prompt, if I can spell correctly, prompt. Then we have our message to the user. So I will say, please enter circle or rectangle. Then what I want to do is I want to store that in a variable. So we'll call the variable user decision. So we'll say let user decision be equal to prompt. Please enter circle or rectangle. Then what I want to do is I want to take that user decision and basically make sure it's converted to uppercase. So I'm going to say user decision is equal to, so I'm overriding the value of user decision. And remember, because the variable has already been declared up here with the let keyword, I don't need to redeclare the variable. So I don't need to say let user decision again. We would get an error. It's just user decision without the let keyword. So we say user decision is equal to itself, user decision, but I'm going to call or invoke to uppercase parentheses. Awesome. Now that we've got the user input, we want to start doing our checks, you know, using some sort of logic in JavaScript to make a decision. So we know to do that, we have our if statement. So we can say if, and we'll write out the code for the rectangle first because it's just a bit longer. Get that out of the way. So we'll say if user decision is strictly equal to rectangle in uppercase, we want to enter this code block here. So what do we want to do? Well, we want to get the user to basically enter height and a width, store that in a variable, and then pass that to our function that calculates the area of a rectangle, and then log that result out to the console. But we haven't actually declared our function yet, so let's do that first. Let's create or define a function. So we'll say function, that keyword function. There we're going to have calculate rectangle area. There we're going to have our width and height. So we'll say width and height, curly braces. And then all we want to do is just return width times height. Width times height. So that will get us the area of a rectangle. Now we've created our function, but we have to get in the user input. So I'm going to prompt the user to enter height, convert that to type number, and then store that in a variable called height. So I'll say we'll do width first. So I'll say let width be equal to, and remember, I want to convert this to type number. So do the prompt first. So we'll say prompt, please enter a width, please enter a width. So I hope all this code makes sense. We've been building up to this now for quite some time. So I'm just using prompt, have some sort of message to the user, in this case, please enter a width, and we want to convert that to type number. Just wrap that in an opening and closing curly brace there. So let width be equal to number, inside of parentheses, prompt, inside of parentheses again, please enter a width. Have two parentheses there, so that one corresponds with this one, and that one corresponds with that one, otherwise you'll get an error. So we've got the width. Now we need to do the same for height. So we want to say let height be equal to number, prompt. We want to say please enter a height. Please enter a height. Awesome. Okay. And then what we want to do is, now that we've got the width and the height, we want to pass that into our function up here called calculate rectangle area. Okay. So then we're going to store that in a results variable. So I'm going to say let result, the result of the operation, is going to be equal to, and we know we need to call or invoke the function. So calculate rectangle area, and what we want to do, we want to pass in both the width as an argument and the height as an argument. So that is us essentially here basically taking the user input, the width and the height, and passing those arguments into the function above called calculate rectangle area. Awesome. Then what we want to do is just log that result out to the console. So we'll say console.log the area is, and then results. Awesome. So now we've coded up the code for calculating the rectangle area, getting the user input, passing it into the function as arguments, returning the results, storing it in the result variable, and then just logging that out to the console. But remember, we only do all of this code, enter this code block, if the user decision was equal to a rectangle. Okay? Now we want to write up the code for if they choose circle. So we can say else if, and here we're going to have our condition. Let's just create an extra line of code there for readability. Else if user decision is strictly equal to circle, we want to enter this code block. So what do we want to do? Well, similar to above, the first thing we want to do is create our function that will actually calculate the area of a circle. So function keyword, then we're going to call it calculate circle area. Okay. I just want to have our function names be descriptive, so that calculates the rectangle, that calculates the circle. It's easy to read. We have our parentheses, and we know that this function is going to be defined with only one parameter. So unlike above, where you have to pass in two arguments, the width and the height, to calculate the area of a rectangle, to calculate the area of a circle, as we saw in the last tutorial, all we need to do is just define one parameter, in this case radius, and then we're going to have our code. We're going to essentially return the result of this. And how do we calculate the area of a circle? Well, we take pi 3.14159 times the radius that was passed in to the power of 2. Okay, so we have 3.14159 multiplied by the radius to the power of 2. So there's 2 powers there. Okay? Awesome. What's next? Well, we need to get the radius from the user, right? So we want to prompt the user. So we can say prompt, enter a message. So we'll say, please enter a radius, or please enter their radius. Please enter a radius, if I can spell correctly, semicolon to end the statement. And then what you want to do is, wait, why? Oh yeah, sorry. I'm losing my thought here, my thought process here. Okay, so we want to convert that to type number, so wrap that. And then what we want to do is we want to store that in a variable. So we're going to say let radius be equal to, so what I've done here is I'm prompting the user, please enter a radius. Whatever they press on their keyboard, we're converting it to type number and storing it in the radius variable. Now what we want to do is we want to pass radius into the calculate circle area function above. So to do that, we just say calculate circle area, and you want to pass in the radius. Awesome. Then what you want to do is you want to store that in a result variable. So we say let results be equal to, okay. And then you just want to log that out of the console. So say console.log, similar to above, the area is, and then the results. Awesome. And then lastly, you just want to do an else. You know, maybe they didn't enter rectangle or circle. You just want to maybe alert, you know, you did not choose correctly. You did not choose correctly. And then the program will end, okay? You could, if you wanted, echo this up so that it's a while loop and the program keeps asking the user until they enter correctly. But we'll speak more about programs with while loops later on in the course. Let me just double check I'm happy with the code before we test it in the browser and embarrass myself. Okay, so we have a string prompt, please enter circle or rectangle. We store that in user decision, that variable. Then I'm saying user decision is equal to itself dot to uppercase. So I'm converting it to uppercase. So if they enter, for example, circle like that, we're converting it to circle like that, i.e. uppercase. Then we're doing our checks with our if statement. So we're saying if the user decision is strictly equal to a rectangle, we're going to enter this code block. So we have our function, calculate rectangle area. We have our width and our height. Then we have our calculation here. So width times height gets the area of a rectangle. So that calculates area of a rectangle, and we're returning that, return width times height. Now that that function's been defined, we can ask the user to enter a width and height. So we say, please enter a width, convert it to type number, we store it in the width variable. We also say, please enter height, convert to type number, store in the height variable. Then what we do is, we call or invoke the calculate rectangle area function. We pass in width and height, the two inputs the user chose. They're now recorded as variables. And what we do is we pass those in as arguments to the function. Then once that's done, we just log out the result. The area is result. If, however, the user chooses circle rather than rectangle, we have user decision is strictly equal to circle. We have our function here, function calculate circle area. So all this does is basically it just calculates area of a circle. And yeah, we're returning pi times the radius to the power of 2. Now that the function's been defined, we want to get the user input. So we just prompt the user, please enter radius, convert to type number. We store it in the radius variable. Then what we do is we pass in the radius variable to the function as an argument. We say calculate circle area. We pass in the radius. It's returned to us. And then we store that in the result variable. And then we just log console.log the area is result. Otherwise, if they don't enter either, we just alert out you did not choose correctly. So if I save and refresh, let's go to Google Chrome. Hopefully there's no errors. This page says, please enter circle or rectangle. If I do circle first, please enter a radius, I don't know, 11. We get the area is 380. Alternatively, if I say rectangle, press OK, enter a width, we'll say 10, enter a height, we'll say 5, we get the area is 50. Okay, awesome. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. It was just a program where we basically asked the user, do they want to calculate the area of a circle or a rectangle? And we've already spoken through the logic. So I'll paste this code in the comments on YouTube. Okay, awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Okay, hopefully the last challenge didn't scare you off. In this tutorial, we're going to do just a very basic function just to get more practice with using the function keyword, defining a function, and getting used to parameters, and of course the return statement. So all I want to do in this tutorial is we're going to create a function using the keyword function. The function will basically be a function that is expecting to receive an argument passed in, and then it just returns whatever number is passed in doubled. Okay, so if you pass in the number 2, it will return 4. If you pass in 10, it will return 20. So I've written out the pseudocode here, the steps, so please feel free to pause the video and try come up with this by yourself, otherwise you can code along. Really, we're doing a lot of very basic function exercises for practice to get the foundations, and then we can start doing more cool stuff later on in this course. So we know if we want to create a function, we use the function keyword. I'm going to call the function double number. We have our parentheses. So this function will be defined with one parameter. We can call that parameter number. So this function is expecting to receive in a number, and that number will obviously be a number. Okay. Then what we want to do is we just want to return the number that was passed in times 2. So we just say return number times 2. And that's it. That's our function. This is a short tutorial. So if I want to pass in, what numbers did we say? 5, 25, 200. So if we say let result 1 be equal to double number, so now we're calling or invoking our function, we can pass in the number 5 and then just console.log result 1. Okay, so what's happened here is I've created our function, used the keyword function. The function's called double number. We've defined a parameter called number. Okay, and then we just return whatever number was passed in times 2. So here we are passing in 5 to the double number function. Remember, to call or invoke our function, you just type out the name of the function with parentheses and pass in any arguments that you need to. Then we store that in this variable here called result1, and then we just log out result1 to the console. So this should give us an answer of 10. So if I save and refresh, we get 10. Awesome. So you can do this again with, we'll just say results now and do it with 25. If I pass in 25 to the function, we should expect to get back 50. So if I save and refresh, result 1 is not defined. Oh, apologies, yeah, I changed the name of result 1, but I didn't change it there. So I just save and refresh now. Apologies about that. So that's what happens when you make reference to a variable that doesn't exist, by the way. So now we get 50. Awesome. And then lastly, if we want to pass in 200 to our function, well, double 200, or 200 times 2 should be 400. Okay? So if we save and refresh, we get 400. Okay, awesome. So that's how you write a function in JavaScript that doubles whatever number was passed into it. I'll see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to create a function that checks to see if a number is an even number or if it is an odd number. And what this function is going to do is actually going to return a Boolean value to us. So previously we've seen how we can pass in a number and double the number and return that value. In this function we're going to be passing in one data type, i.e. a number, but getting back a different data type, i.e. a Boolean value of true or false. So if we pass in an even number, such as the number 2, 4, 16, etc., we want to return true if the number is an even number. Otherwise, we want to return false if it is an odd number. So based on what we've covered so far in this course, we should definitely be able to write this up. So once again, you're going to have your function keyword, give your function a name, is even number check or something like that, you'll have your parentheses. You know you're passing in one data type because I said you're going to pass a number, so you can just define a parameter, call it number. Then you have your opening and closing curly braces, and inside of all of that is the code that runs when the function is fired or executed, etc., or invoked. And that's our code block. So you know, if you want to do a check if a number is even or odd, you could use the if statement. So in the if block, we'll just do a check to see if a number is even. If it is, return true, else return false. And we already know how to check if a number is even or odd because we know we can use mod 2 or modulus 2. So for example, if we have the number 4, 4 mod 2, 4 divides an even into 2, there's nothing left over. Okay, so let's write this up together. So we're going to have our keyword function. We'll say is even number or is even check or something, is even number check. Okay, or is even number is fine. Parentheses. So we know we need to pass in some sort of data or value to this function as an argument. We're going to be passing in a number to do, because we need to pass in a value for the check to happen. So we can just define a parameter here. This function is expected to receive in some data. We can just call it number. And then inside of our function, what we can do is we'll do an if statement. So if, we'll do some condition there. If basically the number is an even number, we want to return true. Otherwise, else return false. Okay? And how we can do our check is, we've seen previously the modulus operator. So that's the modulus operator or mod. So we know that 2 mod 2 divides in evenly, 0 is left in over. Because 2 divides in evenly to 2, there's nothing left over. We know, for example, 3 mod 2 has a leftover of 1. 3 doesn't divide in evenly to 2. It divides in 1 time with 1 left over. If you go up to 4, so 4 mod 2, we know that 4 divides in evenly to 2, and there's nothing left over. I'll just do 5, etc., etc. So 5 mod 2, well, it divides in twice, but there's 1 left over. So really what you are able to see here, the pattern, is that when there's a 0 left over, it's an even number. Any number that's even mod 2 will have 0 left over. Otherwise, it'll be an odd number. So because we know this, we can use that to write the logic for the check and a if statement. So what we can do is we can say if the number that's been passed in, if number mod 2 is strictly equal to 0, basically we know that we've passed in an even number, so return true. Otherwise, return false. Okay? And then what we can do is just basically console.log out the results of us passing in variable to our number. So we can say is even number, pass in 2 to start off. So let's have a look and see what we get. And we get true. Okay? So what we did was we passed in 2 to our function is even number, and we just logged that out directly to the console. If you wanted, you could create a variable as well. Say let some variable name is equal to check, and then log that out to the console. So let's do another number. Let's do 104. Is that an even or an odd number? That's true, so it's an even number. Let's do 57. And we get false. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is a very basic check in JavaScript, a function that checks if a number is an even or an odd number. If you wanted as well, you wouldn't have to return true or false, so you could just log out to the console, number is even, or number is odd, etc. So I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. That is the first time in this course, I think, where we've actually passed in one data type, i.e. number, and got back another data type, i.e. a boolean. So that's awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Hello everyone and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to pretend we work for a company called Kent Bank. So Kent is a part of the United Kingdom. I've never been, but it looks like a nice place. So we're going to pretend we work for this bank in Kent, and we have to write a program that is going to decide whether our customers get approved for a mortgage or not. So there'll be some conditions based on what our manager has told us. So the client has to have savings greater than or equal to £20,000, and they must be debt free. If both of those conditions evaluate to true, our program will approve them for a mortgage, and then we'll just lend them 5 times their salary. Okay, so that is what we have to look forward to in this tutorial. So we're going to create a fictional client just for the sake of it, really. So we're going to have like client name, client savings, whether the client is debt free, and their salary. Obviously, it's not ideal, putting all this information into just separate variables. Really, you'd want to wrap that in an object, but we haven't covered objects yet in this course, so we're just going to create our variables. So I'm going to say let client name be equal to Rachel Dawes. Welcome to our bank, Rachel. So what are your savings? So Rachel tells us that she has saved £25,000. Awesome, good job, Rachel. Now we want to ask Rachel, are you debt free? She says yes. Awesome. So we say let is client debt free. I've gone for a capital C there, just make a note of that. And then Rachel, what's your salary? She says she earns £42,000 a year. Good for you, Rachel. Let client salary be equal to 42,000. Awesome. Okay. Right. So we have our details. We don't really need to use Rachel's name, I guess. Really, we just want to find out if we can lend to her or not. So we're going to create a function called will mortgage be approved. And you already know, based on the rules of Kent Bank and our manager, what they've informed us, the client has to be debt free and they must have savings greater than or equal to 20,000. We'll check their savings first, and then if they're debt free. So basically, you should know what to do. Use the function keyword, give your function a name, pass in 2 parameters, pass in 2 arguments. The function will be defined with 2 parameters, so we're ready to receive in the data as arguments. Then we just do an if statement, and we'll use the double ampersand. So if condition 1 and condition 2 are both true, return true, else return false. So we have function will mortgage be approved. I suppose I could just say mortgage approval. Mortgage approval, that'll be simple, true or false. So mortgage approval. So 2 parameters, savings and debt free, or debt status. Debt free is fine. Then we have our curly braces. So inside of here, what we want to do is we want to do our if statement. If the client has savings greater than or equal to 20,000, and if they are debt free, we will return true. So the first thing we want to do is just check savings. So you say savings greater than or equal to 20,000, and if the client is debt free, so you could say and if debt free is equal to true. What you can do as well, if you want, is you can just wrap the first condition inside of parentheses and the second condition inside of parentheses. Okay, and then if both of those conditions are true, we can just return true. In other words, mortgage approval or mortgage approved has been granted. Else we're going to return false. We're not going to lend to this person. They're not going to get mortgage approval. So basically, application rejected, I'm sorry to say. Okay, awesome. Now, some of you will probably know you don't actually have to have debt free as strictly equal to true. You can just delete all of that as want and just check to see debt free. Because remember, if we were to pass in Rachel's details, we're passing in is client debt free, that'll be a Boolean true. We're passing in true, so that'll be hard coded true really, because that'll be true. Well, it's not hard coded because the data can change, but essentially we'll be checking to see if savings is greater than or equal to 20 and if debt free is true. I'll put it back to strictly equal to true for now, just for user readability, but you can delete that if you want, because checking to see if debt free is strictly equal to true, it's really just the same as just checking debt free, whether it's truty or falsy. Okay, awesome. Now what we want to do is we want to pass in Rachel's details to our function. We'll store that in a variable called lending decision and then just log out the lending decision to the console. So now we're going to say let lending decision be equal to, so this is now where we're going to call or invoke our function. So it's the mortgage approval function, and we want to pass in two arguments. So the first one is savings has been defined as a parameter for the function. So Rachel's savings here are stored in the variable client savings. So you can just paste that in. I'll type it out. So client savings. Okay, so client savings. I'm now taking Rachel's details. So remember, 25,000 is what Rachel saved. It's stored in this variable. I'm passing that in as an argument that will be going into our mortgage approval function. And then basically, is Rachel debt free? What's her status? So let's paste that in. So what do you think is going to happen? Well, basically, we have our variable lending decision. We're assigning that the value of mortgage approval, the function, but we've passed in our arguments. So we're passing in client savings. So remember, client savings is 25,000. So 25,000 is the value I'm passing in here to the function, and that's being passed in, received here as an argument. So now we're checking to see if 25,000 is greater than or equal to 20,000. That evaluates to true. And is the client debt free? Well, we have a variable here. Is client debt free? That's equal to true. So we're passing in true here. That is being received there as an argument true. So now we're checking to see if true is strictly equal to true. So basically, condition 1 and condition 2 both evaluate to true. Therefore, we return true. Rachel has been approved for mortgage approval. So we can log that out to the console. So we can say console.log lending decision or lending request approved. And then we'll just say lending decision. Okay. Now if we save and refresh, let's have a look. And we get lending request approved. Okay, awesome. Now that we've been approved, however, we want to let the client know how much we're going to lend to them. So then we can do as an if check. We can say if lending decision is equal to true. And remember, I do have access to lending decision here because this lending decision has been declared in the root of the document. So it is a global variable. That is why I'm able to just get access to it here in that if check. So if lending decision is equal to true, basically we want to first of all calculate the mortgage amount. So we'll say let mortgage amount be equal to the client salary. So client salary. And again, we have access to the client's salary because it has been declared globally in the root of the document. That's why I have access to it down here. So client salary, and we're going to lend them 5 times their salary. That is the policy of Kent Bank where we work. So now we have our mortgage amount. Let's let the client know how much we're going to lend to them. We'll just will we log it out to the console? Yeah. We'll say console.log. Let's do backticks because I want to embed the variable mortgage. So let's say congratulations. Let's do Rachel's name. So client name. Congratulations, Rachel Dawes. You have been approved. You can borrow. You have been approved for, and then the mortgage amount variable. Okay. So now if I save and refresh, let's see how much Rachel can borrow. So lending request approved is true, and we say congratulations, Rachel Dawes. You have been approved for £210,000 sterling. Okay, awesome. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. Really what we did is we created 4 variables here. So client name is Rachel Dawes, client savings 25,000, is client debt free, that was assigned a Boolean value of true, client salary 42,000. Then what we did was we defined or created our function here. So here is basically where we defined our function, and down here is where we called or invoked the function. This is where we called or invoked function and passed in the details. So for our function, we just used the keyword function. We called it mortgage approval. Inside of the parentheses, we have 2 parameters, savings and debt free. So that information is passed in as arguments, and we're just checking to see if client savings is greater than or equal to 20,000 and they are debt free, we will return true. Remember, with the and operator in JavaScript or the AND logical condition, both sides have to evaluate to true, and we return true. Else we return false. Then what we do is we call upon our function, we pass in the client savings, in this case 25,000, and the client's debt status to get our lending decision. If that is returned to us as true, we then just log out to the console, lending request approved, and then if it is true, we then run this if statement where we basically calculate the mortgage amount and log it out to the console. Okay? Remember, we don't enter that if statement if the client is not approved for a mortgage. So we could just basically write some logic for that saying else you've not been approved. But I'll let you do that. So guys, that's it for this tutorial. I'll see you in the next one. Thank you. Awesome. Okay, welcome back. So in this tutorial, I'm going to show you a different way in which we can write functions in JavaScript. So far, what we've been doing is we've been writing function declarations. You use the keyword function, you give the function a name, and then you define your function. You decide whether it has parameters or not. You have your curly braces, and in there is the code block, the code that will run when the function is called upon. So that is a function declaration. You can also write a function expression. So a function expression is a function that has no name. It can be stored in a variable. You'll often hear people refer to them as anonymous functions. Anonymous functions because they have no name. So in this tutorial, I'm just going to show you difference in terms of the syntax, how you can structure functions. And then in the next tutorial, we'll talk about how they behave differently because the behavior is different. It's treated differently by JavaScript. So let's just create a function called sayHello using a function declaration. So all we would do is write out the keyword function, give the function a name, sayHello, parentheses. I won't define a parameter, and all this function does when you call or invoke it is basically just says hello. Okay? So the function has been defined, but we haven't called or invoked the function. Remember, we have to call the function for it to fire, for it to run. So all I need to do is just type out the function name, sayHello, semicolon. So now here is where I'm calling or invoking this function here. So if I save and refresh, go down to the Google Chrome browser, we get hello. Okay, awesome. So that is how we can write a function declaration. We've seen function declarations before. But one key difference is where the function declaration has a name, a function expression does not. It is a function without a name. So how would you create one? Well, what we can do is we can actually create a variable and assign that the value of an anonymous function, a function without a name, and this is all known as a function expression. So I'll just use the const keyword because suppose just give you a bit of context here. You're typically going to create a function declaration if you know you might be using that function multiple times in your code, where a function expression, maybe you're only going to run the code once, so you don't really want to give it a name, and maybe even declare it globally. You just want to do it one time. So what you do is you say var let const, we'll do const, and we'll store it in a variable. So the variable will have a name, sayHello, and I'm going to assign this variable the value of a function that has no name. Okay? And then inside of here, I'll just say console.log hello. So what I've done is I've actually declared, or sorry, I shouldn't be saying declared. I've created a function. I've used the function keyword, okay? And we have our parentheses. But you notice the function actually doesn't have a name. What I've done is I've assigned an anonymous function, a function with no name, into this variable called sayHello. So all of this together is known as a function expression. It is a function without a name, and this variable has been assigned the value of a function. So you're probably wondering, how would you call or invoke then a function that has no name? Well, we've stored it in the variable sayHello, so all you need to do is write out the name of the variable that the function has been stored in. So if I now call or invoke sayHello, we should still get hello in the console. Remember, the other function has been commented out. So we get hello, and just to prove it is this one, I'll say hello you, waka waka waka. I don't know what's wrong with me today. I'm so sorry. I'm such a weirdo. Save and refresh. So you get hello you, waka waka waka. So in other words, we've created a function. So using the keyword function, we have our parentheses here. No parameters been passed in. Opening curly brace and closing curly brace. And all of this code will run when that function is called or invoked. The function has no name and we've stored it in this variable called say hello. Okay, so key takeaway from this tutorial, just be aware that you can write functions in many different ways. We already saw this with loops, for example. We saw how you can write a for loop, a while loop, and a do while loop. There's another type of loop that's very popular called the for each loop. So there's different ways of writing loops. There's also different ways of writing functions. So far, what we've seen are function declarations. We use the keyword function, give the function a name, and then we create our function. With a function expression, we have a function that has no name, sometimes referred to as anonymous functions, and we've stored that in a variable, and all of this together is known as a function expression. Okay, that's awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Hi everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial, I'm going to talk to you about pirates. I'm joking, but I haven't actually lost it, don't worry. Basically, when the pirates used to be on the pirate ships, they would hoist up the flag, okay? The flag up the pole, hoisting, that idea of bringing something up. And hoisting is actually something that happens in JavaScript, and how JavaScript can actually treat function declarations and function expressions differently, okay? Right, now, in this course, what we've done so far is we've maybe declared a variable like hero name, assign it the value of Superman, and then after that, log something out to the console and access that variable. So for example, maybe say let hero name be equal to Superman, semicolon to end the statement, and then maybe we log that out to the console, console.log. I'll do double quotes. Maybe we're saying, I think Clark Kent's real name is, and then hero name. Well, what do you think is going to happen? Well, what's going to happen, quite simply, you've seen this before, is, well, we've declared a variable called hero name. We've assigned it the value of Superman. So we're just going to simply log out to the console. I think Clark Kent's real name is hero name, which has a value of Superman. So if we save and refresh, we get, I think Clark Kent's real name is Superman. Okay, so that's kind of behavior that we've seen before. But I have a question for you. What was to happen if I was to delete this line of code here and put it up there? Now I'm trying to say console.log, I think Clark Kent's real name is hero name. Well, is this going to work, right? Because previously we've defined the hero name and then tried to log it out to the console. Where here what I'm doing is I'm trying to log out a variable that it's actually been defined or declared underneath. So what's going to happen? I mean, does JavaScript even treat that variable like it exists? Well, let's find out. We get an error. Cannot access hero name before initialization. What JavaScript is essentially doing is giving out to me. It's saying you've initialized the variable hero name here and assigned it the value. So you can really only access that after initialization has taken place. So if I paste that code back down underneath where I've defined it, we're no longer going to get an error. But that's very interesting. Okay, it's very, very interesting about JavaScript. Now, my question for you is, what happens if I do that with a function declaration and a function expression? What's going to happen? So if I create a function called say hello, no parameters, and it simply logs out hello you to the console, what happens if I try call or invoke the function up here? So just a moment ago, I tried to log out Clark Kent's real name. Sorry, Clark Kent is the real name. Just a moment ago, I was trying to log out a variable hero name with a value of Superman to the console. But JavaScript was given out to me saying, no, you cannot log that out before initialization. Well, what about function declarations? So do you think we're going to get the same error, that I'm trying to call or invoke a function before it has actually been defined? Well, let's find out. What do you think is going to happen? Do we get an error, or do we log out hello you to the console? Well, if I save and refresh, we actually get hello you. So we're not getting the same behavior we just saw a moment ago. And this is the concept of hoisting in JavaScript. So what JavaScript is doing is it's hoisting the function declaration. So function declaration will be hoisted to the top of the file in JavaScript. Essentially what's happening is JavaScript is saying, okay, I see this say hello function, but it hasn't been defined or declared. Let me go look throughout the file and see if I can find it. And it's almost as if JavaScript is taking this function and hoisting it above where we've actually made a call to invoke the function, okay? Now the key thing is, JavaScript will not actually do this for function expressions, okay? So if I now create a function expression, so remember, function expression is a function with no name. So if I say function, and we just log out hello to the console, and then I store this function in a variable, so we're going to create our function expression. If I say let say hello be assigned the value of this function, we saw previously that to call or invoke this function, we simply need to write out the name of the variable and add parentheses. Okay, so the function has been defined. We have this anonymous function with no name. We've assigned it into the variable say hello. So say hello has been assigned the value of a function, and to call or invoke it, we just write out the name of the variable, and then we have our parentheses. So we've seen this before previously, so that should work for us. But now what happens if I do the same thing I just did a moment ago with the function declaration? If I if I delete, cut and paste that code there and paste it up here, and I save, what's going to happen? Well, let's have a look. We're going to get an error. Cannot access say hello before initialization. So it was the same thing with the variables. So the key point is this. In JavaScript, if you write a function declaration, JavaScript will hoist up the function. So you can actually call or invoke a function before you've declared it in the document, okay? JavaScript will not do this for function expressions. For this reason, some people actually prefer working with function expressions, the whole concept of, you really should define a function before you try invoke it. So that's just something to be aware of. So the key takeaway from this tutorial is JavaScript has this concept called hoisting, okay? And it will treat a function declaration different to a function expression. JavaScript will hoist up the code from a function declaration, but it will not do that from a function expression. I know that sounds a bit complicated, but we're going to get a lot more practice with functions over the next few tutorials and over the rest of this course. So I'll see you in the next one. Okay, awesome. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to create a guessing game where the user has to guess a number between 1 and 1000. Don't worry, I'm not a complete psychopath, because if the user guesses too high, we're going to tell them they've guessed too high, and if they've guessed too low, we're going to tell them they've guessed too low. So hopefully they'll be able to get it, in around 6, 7, 8, 9 guesses. So I've already written out the code just so I can demo the game to you. So I genuinely don't know what the answer is. I'll take a few guesses and then we'll code it out together. So if I guess the number 1, hopefully I don't win. So I guess too low. If I guess the number 999, I guess too high. So what I'll do is I'll just start taking midpoints. So if I guess 500, I guess too low. I'll go up to 750. I guess too high. I'm going to go to 850. Oh, sorry, I guess too high. So I'll go to 600. I guess too low. Right, we'll go to 650. Guess too high. Okay, I'm going to go for 625. Too low. Let's do 640. Too low. 645. Guess too high. All right. 644. Guess too high. 642. Ah, congratulations, so on. Okay, so it took me a few guesses. So that is essentially the game we're going to code up. So here is how I did it. I'll talk us through it and then we'll delete the code and we'll write it out together. Basically, at the very end here, we have our call to invoke the function play game. So basically, I've used the function keyword. We have a function here with no arguments to be passed in, so no parameters defined there. It's a play game function. We have the opening curly brace and the closing curly brace down the end, and everything in between is the code that's going to run when the play game call asks or tells the function to run. So what I do is I say mat.random and times that by 1000. Then I floor all of that, so discard whatever is after the decimal place, and I just add 1 to it just to give us a number between 1 and 1000. Okay? I store that in a variable number. So we've seen the mat object before, so this is the mat object. So if you use dot notation, you can call an inbuilt method. So a method is just a function that's already been defined in JavaScript. We've been writing our own functions, but we'll start talking more about methods, i.e. an inbuilt function in JavaScript, a superpower that's already available to us as we go through the course. So we've seen mat.random before, we've seen mat.floor before. Then what I do is I just prompt the user to guess a number between 1 and 1000. So that's just a string there. We've seen strings before. We're prompting out the message. Then what I do is I wrap all of that in parentheses and just basically convert it to type number, and then I store it in user guess. Then what I do is I just create a Boolean variable. I say let user wins and assign it the value of false. And because that Boolean has a value of false, I'm able to use that as a condition to run the while loop. So our game really, a lot of it is run inside of the while loop. So basically, we know, we've seen while loops previously, that if this evaluates to true, whatever condition we're evaluating, it'll run the loop. So while essentially user wins is not equal to true and user wins is equal to false, while user wins is not equal to true, so initially it's false not equal to true. Well, is false not equal to true? False is not equal to true, so that evaluates to true, therefore we enter the loop. Now, the first condition I test for is if the user wins. If the user guesses the right number, what I do is I just assign user wins a Boolean value of true, so I override the value of this variable here, and basically that breaks us out of the loop. We won't enter the loop again, okay? Because then what we're testing for is true is not equal to true, true is equal to true, so true not equal to true would evaluate to false. Hence the loop stops running. And then I just let the user know they won. I just alert out, congratulations, you won. Then what I do is I have an else if, and basically I just say if the user guess is greater than the number they're supposed to guess, I just say alert, you guessed too high, and then they have to guess again. So I just say user guess is equal to number, prompt guess a number between 1 and 1000. If they guess too low, so if user guess is less than the number, I just alert out that should be you guessed too low, that was a typo, and then I prompt the user to enter guess. Else, if something else happens, I don't know what could possibly happen, I just alert out system error and please guess again. So this is all the code we're going to write in this tutorial. So just delete that, press save, so all the code is gone, and just refresh, so now nothing happens. So we're going to code this out together. Well, we know, first of all, we need to create a function. So we're going to have our function. I called it play game. So this function is not going to have any arguments passed into it. So we have our curly braces, we have our parentheses, and then we have our curly braces. Let me just take a sip of water. I'm so sorry. Awesome. Okay, that was really good water. Now what I need to do is I need to create a variable. I'm going to call it number. So this is the number the user has to guess. I'm going to say let number be equal to, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to say mat.random to generate a random number. Okay, we've seen mat.random before. It goes from 0 up to like just less than 1, so 0.99999. What I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply that by 1000, okay, and then I'm going to floor that. So we've seen mat.floor before, mat.floor. So really what I'm doing here is I'm passing mat.random times 1000 into mat.floor, and it'll just disregard everything after the decimal place. So that actually basically gives us a number between 0 and 99999. So if I add 1 to it, we get a number between 1 and 1000. Okay, so that's what that piece of code does there. Semicolon to end the statement. Then what we want to do is we want to get a guess from the user and store that in a variable. So I'm going to call it user guess. I'm going to say let user guess. I'm going to use camel case there. So note that the G is a capital letter. And I'm going to assign that the value of number and then prompt. So really with prompt here, all I'm doing is just prompting the user. I'm saying guess a number between 1 and 1000. And then remember, if the user presses a key on their keyboard, that is of type string. So I just wrap it inside of number with a capital N, and basically then the user guess is now of type number. And that just helps when we're doing the comparisons, checking the the number of type number basically with the user guess, which we do not want to be of type string. Then what we need to do is we need to keep track of whether the user has won the game or not. So initially the user has not won the game because they haven't even taken a guess. So we know we can keep track of whether something is true or not in JavaScript by using Boolean true or false. So we have to store that in a variable. So I'll say let user wins be equal to false. Okay. So when the game starts, user wins, the Boolean variable that keeps track of whether the user has won the game or not, that is assigned a value of false. And then what we do is we have our while loop. So we have while, our while keyword to create a while loop, some condition we're testing for inside of parentheses, and then our opening and closing curly brace. So we want this loop to run while the user has not won the game. So we can say while user wins is not equal to true. Okay. Then what we're going to do is we're going to do our check to see if the user has won the game. So we have various conditions to check for. So for example, has the user won the game? Have they guessed too high? Have they guessed too low? Did something else happen? So let's just test for if they are very lucky and get the number right in the first go. So we have our if statement. So now we're just going to check to see if user guess. So remember, user guess is when we prompt the user, we ask them to enter a number between 1 and 1000. If they do that correctly, we convert it to type number and store it in the variable user guess. So now we're comparing to see if user guess is equal to number that the computer has randomly generated, because we've used mat.random to get a random number between 0 and just under 1. We've multiplied it by 1000 and we floored it. Oh, and I forgot to add 1. Awesome. I'm glad I checked there. Okay, so now if user guess is equal to that number, they've won the game. So first of all, before we tell them, we want to just update the value of user wins to be true to make sure that the game stops. So basically, we just say user wins is equal to true. Remember, we've already declared the variable user wins up here, so you don't need to use the let keyword here because the variable has already been declared essentially. And then what we need to do is just alert out to the user, let them know that they've won. So we'll do it in capital letters. We'll say, congratulations, you won the game, which is pretty awesome. Congrats to them. Then what we need to do is, in the else if, we're going to check to see if the user has guessed too high. So we can check for that by saying if user guess is greater than the number that the computer generated. If that's the case, we basically need to alert out to the user that they've guessed too high. So we can say alert, you've guessed, you guessed, you have guessed, you've guessed. Whoops. Let's just do, let's keep it simple. I don't want to be escaping strings in this tutorial. Let's just say you guessed too high. Awesome. And then basically what we need to do is we need to get the user to guess again. So let's just copy this code here and paste that in. Then we have our check to see if the user has actually guessed too low. So if user guess is less than number, what do we want to do? Well, we want to let them know that they've actually guessed too low. So we'll say alert, you've guessed too low. Just want to care about our code. So I just want to indent that slightly for readability. Awesome. Okay. So alert, you've guessed too high. No, you've guessed too low. Awesome. And then I just want to prompt the user to guess again. And then lastly, I just want to have a condition in case something else happens. So maybe they actually type in a message or something. I don't want the game to break. So basically, the computer will alert, system error, or I have no idea what's going on. So we'll say system error, try again. And yeah, oh yeah, and we also need to get them to guess again. Okay, awesome. Okay, so let me just review this, make sure I'm happy with it, because I forgot to add a 1 there, I apologize. So I haven't called or invoked the function yet. So if I go to my file, sorry, if I go to Google Chrome, nothing has happened. So as you can tell, I have no idea what the number is going to be here. We could console it out in the console.log number, but it's kind of more fun for me recording if I don't know the answer. So we'll just play one more time. So basically, right before I call or invoke the function, so I need to call the function. Actually, let's call the function. Let's play the game, and then we'll just talk through the code again. So play game. Right, this is going to play now. Have I done everything correctly? So we function, play game. We have our number. That looks good. Yeah, user wins. Okay, I'm happy this is going to work. So let me just play it one more time, and then we will talk through the code. So I'm going to guess 500. I guess too low. I'll do 750. I guess too low again. All right, I'll do 900. I guess too high. I'm going to do 850. I guess too low. If I do 875, I guess too low. All right, if I do 888, I guess too high. What about 885? Guess too low. All right, 887. Guess too high. 886. Congratulations, you won the game. Awesome. Okay, great. So guys, I'll just talk you through this briefly. So remember, basically, when we write all of this code inside of our function, we have to actually call or invoke the function to start the game. So that's what I do down here. I basically write out the name of the function, play game, parentheses, no parameter is defined here, so no arguments passed in, semicolon to end the statement. The game is now being played. So I've used the function keyword because we're writing a function. We have given it a name of play game. There's no parameters defined. We have our opening curly brace here and our closing curly brace there. So everything in between is part of the play game function. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get the computer to basically generate a number. And the computer does that for us. So what we do is we basically say math.random to get a number between 0 and just under 1, and we multiply that by 1000. We pass all of that into mat.floor. So the mat object is built into JavaScript, and we can call .floor, this inbuilt method, to essentially round down. So that gives us a number between 0 and 999, and by just adding 1 at the end of this expression here, we basically get a number between 1 and 1000. We store that in the variable number. Then what we have to do is we have to prompt the user to guess a number. So we have prompt here, and inside of parentheses we have our string. We say guess a number between 1 and 1000. We convert that to type number because that will help us with the comparisons later on, and we store that in a variable called user guess. Then we need to keep track of whether the user has won the game or not. So we basically keep track of that in a variable called user wins, and we've initially signed that the Boolean value of false, because how can the user have won the game if they haven't even guessed yet? So that is set to false. Then we have our while loop. So the game is going to be playing while the user has not won, i.e. while user wins is not equal to true. So we've seen the while loop before, we've seen negating, and then what we do is we have our checks. So if hypothetically the user guesses the right number in the first go or in any go, we say if user guess is strictly equal to number, so they're the same value in the same data type, we basically update that the user has won the game. So user wins is now true. So user has won, and we basically just alert the user to let them know that they've won. Remember, if user wins is equal to true, we'll break out of the while loop. The while loop will stop running, because then what happens is user win will have a value of true, and we're checking to see if true is not equal to true. That will, evaluate to false. The condition no longer evaluates to true, therefore the while loop no longer runs. If hypothetically the user has not yet won the game and the game is in session, we're in the while loop. If they guess too high, if the user guess is greater than the number they need to guess, we just alert out, you guessed too high, and we prompt the user to enter a guess again. If conversely they guess too low, we do the check and we let the user know they've guessed too low. We say, alert, you've guessed too low, and we ask them to guess again. Else, if something else happens, I just say there's an error and I ask them to guess again. If you wanted to make this more interesting, you could even limit the user to number of guesses to add a bit of pressure. Hopefully you're getting more comfortable now with JavaScript as we go through the course. I will paste this code in the video underneath. I hope you enjoyed that one, and I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay, welcome back. In this tutorial, I'm going to introduce you to arrow functions in JavaScript. So an arrow function is a more concise way in which we can define or create functions in JavaScript. It was introduced a few years ago as part of ES6, and essentially it's kind of considered a more modern, almost a more cool way of writing functions. Now, when you are writing an arrow function, you don't need to use the function keyword. So we can write a function without using the function keyword. And there are some differences between the functions we've been writing up to now, the function declarations versus arrow functions. So rather than me talking, the best thing to do is for us to write an arrow function in JavaScript. So we're just going to do one that just logs out to the console, hello world. So previously what we would do is we would use the function keyword. Maybe our function will be called hello world. We'd have our parentheses, then we have our curly braces, and we just log out console.log hello world. Okay? If I save and refresh and go to the browser, we know that's going to work. Why is that not working? I never called or invoked the function. Apologies. Hello world. Save. I was actually confused there. Okay, hello world. Awesome. Right. So that is the old way of us writing a function. I'm just going to get rid of the call to log that out, and I'm going to comment this guy out. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to write out that function again, but do it as an arrow function. So what I can do is I can actually basically use the keyword const, then provide the function name. So hello world, okay? Then what I do is I use an equal sign, then I use parentheses. The parentheses are going to be empty because this is a function with no parameter defined. Then we're going to have an equal sign and a chevron. So this thing here looks like an arrow. Notice how the text hello world is after changing color. And then what you do is you just have your opening and closing curly brace. We can put a semicolon here at the end, and in here we can just log out to the console hello world. If I say console.log hello world, okay? And if I want to call or invoke the function, all I need to do is just say hello world and have parentheses at the end to call or invoke that. So what we should do now is we should see hello world with 2 exclamation marks. So if I save and refresh, we get hello world. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is how we can create an arrow function in JavaScript. It is a bit intimidating when you first see it, but we're going to do a few examples throughout this course. We'll probably do more than a few if I'm being totally honest. But essentially, what I've done is I've used the keyword const, then I have the name of the function, hello world. Again, note the use of camel case. The second word has a capital letter, so capital W. Then I use an equal sign. Then I have parentheses. Then I have like this little arrow looking thing, so it's the equal sign and then the chevron. That's why they're kind of called arrow functions, because this here looks like an arrow. Then we have our opening and closing curly brace. We have all the code in between the opening and closing curly brace that will run when the function is called, and we have a semicolon at the end. Just one thing to note, JavaScript does not hoist arrow functions. So if I was to try call or invoke the function before it's been defined, if I paste that there and save, we're actually going to get an error. So let's have a look. Uncaught reference error, cannot access hello world before initialization. So that's one key difference between arrow functions and function declarations. The way we've been writing functions in this course so far, essentially JavaScript will not hoist arrow functions. So in that way, it forces us to write cleaner code where we define the function before we make a call to the function. When I say call the function, I mean, invoke the function. We're telling JavaScript, hey, go call that function. Okay. Yeah, so that's it. I'll see you in the next tutorial. So this is a more modern and concise way of writing functions in JavaScript. The syntax is considered more concise and cooler. Key difference is really, in terms of syntax, you don't need to use the function keyword. You have this cool little arrow thing here. You can use const before the function name, and if you want to call or invoke the function, just write out the name of the function and then parentheses. Okay, so this was our first arrow function in this course. We'll do another one in the next tutorial, and then we'll do arrow functions with 1 parameter, 2 parameters, etc. That's awesome. I'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, in this tutorial what we're going to do is we're going to write an arrow function with 1 parameter defined. So an arrow function that is expecting to receive a piece of data passed in as an argument. So what I'm going to do is we're going to create a function called triple number. I'll do it the old way using a function declaration first, just so you see how it's written. Then we'll do it as an arrow function, and then I'll show you how you can actually really shorten the syntax of an arrow function if there's only 1 parameter. So that's what we'll do in this tutorial. It's going to be a short tutorial, but hopefully I don't scare you off. Arrow functions can be a bit intimidating when you first see them, but we're going to be basically using them for the rest of this course once we get past this section. Okay, so the old way what we would do for the function declaration, so function declaration is we would use the function keyword. So we've seen this many times before. Then what we're doing is we're giving our function a name. So I will call it triple number. We have our parentheses and we have our curly braces. So inside of the parentheses, you have to decide whether this function is taking in an argument or not. It is, because I want to pass in a number as an argument and then return that number times 3 to triple it. So we know we need to define a parameter here inside of the parentheses. So I'll just call it number, and then what we'll do is we will just return number times 3. And if we call or invoke this function, so if I just say console.log triple number times 3, so if I pass in the number 3, for example, we're passing the number 3 into the function triple number. So the function triple number receives 3 as an argument passed in. We return the number, i.e. 3 times 3, we should get 9. If I just save and refresh, because we're logging it out to the console, we get 9. Okay, awesome. I'll do one more example. If we were to do that again, but maybe pass in the number 2, we should get 6. Okay, so I pass in the number 2. What are we doing here? Well, what we're doing is we're taking this number 2. That's the piece of data or the argument that we're passing into the triple number function. So our function is defined up here. So we pass in the number 2, our function accepts it, and then it just returns 2 times 3, so we get 6, and then we just log that out to the console. So if I save and refresh, we get 6. Awesome. Now what we're going to do is we're going to write out that code again, but we're going to do it as an arrow function. Okay, so I just press Control and / to just essentially comment out that code, because if I want to use the same name for the arrow function. So we've seen how we could do this. We say const, give your function a name. I'm going to call it triple number, equal sign, parentheses, equal sign and chevron, i.e. that's why it's called an arrow, opening and closing curly brace, and we can put a semicolon there at the end. And remember, even though this is an arrow function, because it's going to be expecting a piece of data passed in, we're going to pass in an argument, we have to define a parameter. We'll just call it number again. So number is just a parameter. And what is this arrow function going to do? It's just going to return whatever number is passed in times 3. Okay. And all of that is valid syntax, and this will work. So if I say console.log triple number, if I pass in the number 5, we should get back the number 15. So what are we doing here? We're just logging out to the console whatever this result is. So we're passing 5 inside of parentheses to the triple number function. So we have const, the name of our arrow function, triple number. We have the equal to. Then inside of parentheses we have our number, that's our parameter. We have an equal sign and the chevron. So this looks like an arrow. We have our opening and our closing curly brace. And in between the opening and closing curly brace, we just return number times 3. Okay? So this is how we basically write the same code, but as an arrow function. So if I save and refresh, we get 15. So that still works for us. Okay, awesome. Just a couple of things to note. If we wanted to, we could actually make this function, this arrow function, even shorter. So one key thing to note is this. If you are writing an arrow function and there is only one parameter, so if there's only one parameter defined, you can actually remove the parentheses, okay? So I swear you can do that. If I just delete the opening and closing parentheses, this will still work for us. So if I save and refresh, we're not going to get any errors. The function still works. So if I change the data passed in, the argument to 10, so 10 times 3, triple number, our triple number function will return 30. So just to prove this to you, so we still get 30. So basically, if you're writing an arrow function and there's only one parameter, you can delete the parentheses. You cannot do that if the arrow function has no parameter, and you cannot do that if it has multiple parameters. But if there's only one parameter, you can actually delete the parentheses. You can also make this even shorter if you want. Because there's only one line of code here, what you could do is actually bring that all up to the same line. So if I just press delete, okay, we're able to do that. So we appear to have a double semicolon. So actually what we could do is we could delete that guy, okay, and that's still going to work, okay. So if I save and refresh, we should get hopefully no error. So we still get no error. And believe it or not, you're actually able to shorten the syntax even further. Because it's all on the one line, you can actually delete the word return and then the parentheses, sorry, the curly braces, I should say. So if I actually delete return, if I delete that and I delete this, that's still going to work. So I know the syntax looks absolutely insane, but it's still going to work, right? If I save and refresh, I'll prove it to you, and I'll just talk about what we did, okay? Basically, we have a const, we have our function name, okay? We have our equal sign. We have our parameter here. Because there's only one parameter, we actually are allowed to delete delete the opening and closing parentheses. So I'm happy to leave it in, but just note you can delete it. And then because there's only one line of code, we can actually just put that on the same line. But if you want that to be down a line, you can. You can just basically restore the parentheses, the curly braces like so, and then just do return. Okay, and let's just delete that guy and bring that back up. Okay, so that'll still work for us. Okay, awesome. So guys, that is the arrow function in JavaScript with one parameter. So I'm happy to write it out like this for now. I don't want to make it too concise and confuse you, but just note, if you're creating an arrow function with just one parameter defined, you can delete the parentheses, but you cannot do that for an arrow function where you have no parameter defined. You still have to use your parentheses, or if you have multiple. And then, like I say, if you wanted to, you could essentially delete all of that up to the same line, and that will still work for us. Okay, awesome. I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. In the next one, we'll create an arrow function with 2 parameters just for practice. So I'll see you in the next one. Hey everyone, and welcome back. Okay, so far in this chapter 3 of the course, functions, I've showed you now how to create functions, how to use the function keyword, function declaration. We've seen a few arrow functions, we've seen hoisting. So hopefully you're getting a bit more comfortable with the syntax of functions. What I want to do now in the next couple of tutorials is write functions that kind of does something that actually is a bit cool rather than just being like, here's a function kind of thing. So I'm going to give you an assignment for this tutorial and hopefully you can do it and then pause the video and see if we get the same answer. I want you to code up the fizzBuzz challenge, okay? So we're going to do the fizzBuzz challenge from 1 to 100. It's a very popular programming concept. I personally never played the game as a kid, but basically what it is the first person has to shout out the number 1, the next person has to shout out the number 2, but when you get to the number 3, that person actually has to shout out fizz. Any number that is a multiple of 3 or divides in evenly to 3 with nothing left over, you have to say fizz. Then you say 4, but then the next number is actually 5, you have to say buzz. Any number that divides in evenly to 5 is buzz, but any number that divides in evenly to both, so 3 and 5, i.e. multiples of 15, you have to shout out fizzBuzz. Okay? Okay, so, but 45 wouldn't divide into 3, would it? Does 45 divide into 3? It does. Interesting. I was just curious. Okay, so basically, so it'd be 1, 2, fizz, 4, buzz, fizz. Anyway, here is the instructions, okay? So I want you to try code this out. So in terms of what you'd have to do, well, first of all, you're going to have to create some sort of function. I'd like this to be in a function, okay? Then what I want to do is, you're going to have to, first of all, log out numbers 1 to 100, get your loop working. So let's do a for loop. So we'll have a for loop inside of a function. And then inside of that for loop, we're just going to do our checks, right? So the first block can be the if block. We'll have an else if, and then an else, right? So that is how I would do it. Please feel free to pause the video and see if you can get this working. Otherwise, you can code along with me. I'd rather you try to do this yourself. So first of all, I'm just going to do a function declaration. So I'll just say function. I'm going to call the function fizzBuzz. Okay. The function will not have any arguments passed in. Although if you wanted to make it more interesting, you could actually ask the user how many, what number they want to count up to. So that would actually be kind of cool. Okay, great. So we've created our function fizzBuzz. Now what we want to do is we want to have some sort of loop. So for, we know we want to count from the number 1 to the number 100 inclusive. So we've seen loops before. So we just have our counter variable that we have to initialize. So we could say let I be equal to, I'm going to start the counter at 1. Don't want to start it at 0 because we want to log out numbers 1 to 100. And then our for loop is going to run while some condition is true. I want to run while I is less than or equal to 100. I've used the equal sign because I want to be inclusive of 100. I want to include 100 when we run our loop. And then after each loop iteration, I just want to increment our counter variable I using I++. So ++ is the increment operator, which we've seen before. Okay, awesome. Then what we need to do is we need to start doing our checks. So the first condition I'm going to check out for is actually fizzBuzz. If I, it basically is both a multiple of 3 and 5. So we've seen how we can use the logical AND to check 2 conditions in JavaScript. And we've seen with the modulus operator, we can check if a number divides in evenly and then leaves something left over. So any number that divides in evenly to 3, apologies. So 3 mod 3 would be 0, right? And then we can do the same for 5. Any number that divides in evenly to 5, nothing left over. So I mod 5 would be a multiple of 5. So what we'll do is we'll just create both our conditions that we want to check for. So I'm going to have some water, I'm so sorry. Okay, so if I divides in evenly to 3 and there's nothing left over, we know that that number is a multiple of 3. 3, 6, 9, 12, etc. But we want to check if I also divides in evenly to 5 and nothing left over. So just copy this code here and we'll write I mod 5 strictly equal to 0. So I'm checking for both conditions. Checking to see if the number divides an evenly to 3 and if the number divides an evenly to 5. And if that's the case, we can log out fizzBuzz, const.log fizzBuzz. Okay, awesome. Now we want to check to see for fizz. So if the number divides an evenly to 3, nothing left over. So we can say else if, then we want to basically check for a condition here, else if I mod 3. I'm not going to copy the code above, I just want to type this out line by line with you, so we're just talking through the code. So else if I mod 3 is strictly equal to 0, we want to run our code. So you can say console.log fizz. Awesome. Okay. Then we're going to have our else if. We want to check to see if I divides in evenly to 5. I'll just create a bit of space between these the way I did above. Why is else if given out to me? I'll come back to that. I think it just wants the final else. Did I forget a I forgot the curly brace there. Awesome. Okay. Right, I'm gonna get into trouble with my, sorry about this. So hang on. Opening bracket. Do I need another one of these? I believe I do. There we go. Okay. Sorry about that. Nesting can get difficult sometimes. Okay, so we have our function called fizzBuzz. We have our for loop for let I equal to 0. We're going to run the loop while I is less than or equal to 100. I++. We have our opening curly brace for the for loop, which corresponds to here. Our closing brace for the function, and then the else there. Awesome. Okay. Right. So if the number divides an evenly to 3, and the number divides an evenly into 5 with nothing left over in both cases, we log out fizzBuzz. Else if I mod 3 is strictly equal to 0, so if the number divides an evenly to 3, so 3, 6, 9, etc., we log out fizz. Else if the number divides an evenly to 5, what we'll do is just log out buzz. Console.log buzz. Else, what we need to do is just log out the number that we're on, so the counter. So that would be 1, 2, 4, etc., right? So I hope all this makes sense. And then what we need to do is just call or invoke the function. So I'll just say fizzBuzz, and there we go. Right, let's see if our code works, and then we'll talk through it again. So if I save and refresh, we get 1, 2 fizz, yeah, 4, buzz for 5, fizz for 6, 7, 8, 9 fizz, etc., and you see fizzBuzz there. Awesome. Okay, so that is how you can write up the fizzBuzz solution for numbers 1 to 100. Okay, awesome. So guys, I hope you enjoyed that tutorial. What we did basically is we used the function keyword. We called our function fizzBuzz. We have our opening curly brace and our closing curly brace, which I obviously got into trouble here in this tutorial. But we have our for keyword. Then we have our conditions for the for loop. So we're going to run our loop we're going to start our counter variable at I. So the loop starts at I is equal to 1. I is our counter variable. We're going to run the loop while I is less than or equal to 100. So run from 1 to 100. We're going to increment I++ after each loop iteration. And then we're just doing our conditions, right? So we're just checking basically to see that if the number divides an evenly to 3 and it divides an evenly to 5, we just log out fizzBuzz. Else if the number divides an evenly to 3 with nothing left over, we log out fizz. But if the number divides an evenly to 5 with nothing left over, we log out buzz. Did I say buzz there? I meant to say fizz. And then else we just log out the counter. Okay, I've talked too much. That was awesome. That's the fizzBuzz solution. I'll see you in the next tutorial. Okay, what we're going to do in this tutorial is just get a bit more practice with creating functions in JavaScript, functions that actually do something. So in this tutorial, we're going to create a function called flipCoin. And what we're going to do is we're going to generate a random number. We'll just use math.random the way we've seen before. And we know that'll give us a number between 0 and just under 1. And what we'll do then is we'll just have an if statement. where basically if the random number is below 0.5, we will return heads, else we will return tails, and we'll just log that out to the console. Just to get a bit more practice with functions, this is the JavaScript for Beginners course, so if you're watching this, you might be new to JavaScript and functions. So I'll let you decide if you want to use the function keyword and do a function declaration, or if we'll do an arrow function. In the last tutorial, we did a function declaration, so I'd like us to do an arrow function in this tutorial. So what I'll do is I'll use the keyword const, give our function a name. I'll call it flipCoin. Note the use of camel case there. We have our equal sign, we have our parentheses, and then our equal sign and chevron, i.e. our little arrow. And then we're going to have our curly braces. And all of the code in between here will run when the function is invoked or called. Okay? So inside of this function now, what we can do is just generate a random number. I'm going to say let random number be equal to, and I'm going to say mat.random and parentheses. So we've seen this before. So this will generate a random number between 0 and like 0.99999. So basically between 0 and 1, but not quite. Okay. And then what we're going to do is, based on that random number, we're going to basically return either heads or tails. So if random number is less than 0.5, what I want to do is just return heads, else I want to return tails. Okay, so this is just a very basic function that just returns if a random number, that just returns if a coin flip was heads or tails. And then what we can do is store that in a result. So we'll say let result be equal to, and we're just going to call or invoke our flipCoin function. So flipCoin, so to store the result, so heads or tails, of this arrow function into a variable, we say let result be equal to, and we know we need to call or invoke the function by writing out the name of the function and then having our parentheses there. Okay? And remember, there's no argument or parameter defined for this function. We're not passing in, I mean, you could if you wanted. We could code up how many times do you want to flip the coin, and based on that run a loop. So you could do that if you wanted. So let's just say console.log results. And let's see what we get. And we get heads. If I refresh again, heads, tails, tails again, heads, tails, 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 heads, tails. Awesome. Okay, so guys, that is how we can create a function that just mimics the result of a coin toss in the real world. This function basically returns heads or tails, and one of the great things about using mat.random is we can get the computer to basically generate a random number and make a decision off that. We've seen that before. Okay, awesome. So guys, that was that tutorial. That is how we can create a function to flip a coin in JavaScript.